the duel, the claim, just push it all away. The only thing that's important right now is your wife. Astrid's blue eyes were firm and unyielding. She needs you. And no matter what happens going forward, you are not alone. You have me and Hiccup and many others. Let tomorrow handle itself. Eric took a deep breath into his lungs and let it out. Right, he nodded. You're right. A series of shouting sounded outside and they whirled around. One of the guards grunted in pain and the door flung open. Astrid lunged for the nearest butcher knife while Eric jumped in front of the stairs, but they froze when they saw a dark-haired woman in a homespun dress close the door with a snap. I came as soon as I could, Lara said. She marched forward and surveyed Eric's expression, which must have been a little shocked. How is she doing? Are you all right? Despite himself and Astrid's little pep talk moments before, Eric's eyes burned again. Mom. You're here. Well, of course I'm here, Lara said indignantly. I've been present for each and every one of my grandbabies, why wouldn't I? Eric threw his arms around her in a hug. She stiffened, clearly a bit stunned, but soon her arms wrapped around his back. Thank you, he whispered. He pulled back and met her dark eyes. This means more to me than you know. Lara pursed her lips, clearly fighting a proud smile. She put a hand to his cheek. Well, old habits aside, I felt after this long and stressful day you'd need all the help you can get. Astrid quickly embraced her. Yes, indeed. Thank you. She pulled back and exhaled, glancing up the stairs. To answer your question, Mara said, things aren't too far along. But they are progressing, Mara said from the top of the stairs, hands on her hips. Where are my rags and water? Oh gods, Eric darted to the washroom where he knew clean rags were kept. Sorry. The women tittered behind him and he quickly gathered as many rags as he could before running to the well outside for a bucket of water. His head felt clearer than it had all day. Astrid was right. The most important thing right now was being there for Adriana, his Annie, who'd been there through his most trying times. She'd held his hand as he'd nearly died while losing his leg, perhaps the most painful physical experience he'd probably ever go through. Well, now it was her turn. She was about to give birth to their first child. He'd make sure she was as comfortable as possible and get anything she might possibly need until he dropped. He'd hold her hand and distract her from the pain as best he could. Everything else was secondary. As he hauled the bucket of water up from the well, he sloshed cold water onto his arms with the realization that hit him square in the chest. He was going to be a dad today. He huffed a laugh and eagerly ran back to the house. Halfway there he frowned in confusion, then slapped a hand to his forehead before doubling back. He'd left the bucket of water sitting at the well. Gods, I'm really losing it, Eric muttered before snatching it up and shuffling to the back door. He glanced up at the afternoon sun slowly descending toward the trees. If they were lucky, the baby would be born today. There was no telling, perhaps it would be in the early morning. If his poor Annie was really unlucky, it could be even further away. Whatever the case, he reasoned, it was going to be a long, long day ahead. But as he brought the bucket of water to a boil in a metal pot, he reminded himself that it would be okay, and cracked a smile. After so many months of planning and preparing, the baby was coming. He bit his lip at the thrill of excitement that rose in his chest. He grabbed the towels and sprinted up the stairs, ready to help in every way he could. If Genevieve didn't know him so well, she might have thought the injury hadn't even fazed him. But as time dragged on and she kept finding Finn gritting his teeth, clenching his hands into fists or glaring at the ceiling with an icy look colder than a glacier, she knew he was hiding the fact that he was in a lot of pain. Inga came in to check the bandages every once in a while in stony silence. Genevieve was all right with that. When she'd first arrived at the healers, having run to the Sullivan hut to change into more comfortable clothes after the duel, she'd caught them in a heated argument that had set Finn's cheeks aflame in anger. I don't understand why you can't just stay out of it, he'd said. I never asked your opinion. You never ask for anything, you always take, Inga had said in a nasty tone. Therefore, I'm allowed to give my opinion whenever I want, thank you. Shoot off at the mouth all you want, but you're not going to tell me that Genevieve isn't good for me. You haven't even taken the chance to get to know her because of your jealousy. Why would I want to? I'm sure she's interested in you now because of the freedom you offer, but once that novelty wears off, She's going to get tired of you and how you're constantly throwing yourself into danger. That's a lot of stress to deal with for a girl like her. Stop it. Not to mention Mayro. When exactly do you plan on telling her about? Genevieve had slammed the front door so loudly the pottery rattled on a nearby shelf. She didn't quite know why she'd done it, if it was because of the nasty tone coming from Inga's mouth, the rude things she'd been saying about Genevieve herself, or the fact that the girl was clearly about to hurt Finn further by talking about his painful past. Whatever the case, she couldn't stand it. His secrets being spilled out of spite, and Genevieve refused to find out about it in such a way. They were his stories to tell. The argument had halted and she'd stalked into the room with her chin held high. Inga had the decency to look uncomfortable. It was nothing on Finn though, who shoved his hands into his hair and walked to the other side of the room. But not before Genevieve spotted the blood dotting the bandages around his neck. He'd worked himself into such a tizzy that it was wearing on his stitches, and Inga, for all her healing abilities, hadn't done anything about it. Or perhaps he was so upset and stubborn that he wouldn't allow her to take care of it. "I can take it from here," Genevieve had said, grabbing the door and holding it open. "I'm sure you have other patients to attend to." Inga swallowed. "Mara wants me to give a report on his condition when he comes back." "Good. I'll tell her you were harassing him when she arrives." Inga's eyes had flashed, but she'd stalked from the room, muttering under her breath. It had taken all of Genevieve's self-control to shut the door calmly. Almost an hour later, she was still stewing in anger. She'd forced Finn into a chair and changed the bandages herself, refusing to cringe at the blood. He'd been quiet, avoiding eye contact. He seemed to be processing everything that had happened, so she'd stayed silent while cleaning him up and then forcing him to lie down when he admitted that he had a headache. Probably from Brandine clobbering him over the head. He looked a bit worse for wear. Not as bad as he had after the raid, but pretty close. The left side of his face was a bit swollen. Hopefully he wouldn't have a black eye. Someone must have brought him some new clothes because he was no longer wearing the blood-stained blue shirt and jerkin. Now he looked more relaxed in a grey wool shirt with long sleeves. He idly traced a line across his forehead as he stared at the ceiling, as if trying to coax the headache away. She was grateful for the silence. It was comforting to know that they could sit together without feeling the need to talk, to just be in each other's presence and not feel uncomfortable. After everything that had happened today, and it wasn't nearly over yet, she needed the time to process everything. The meeting had been interesting to say the least. Clearly many of the chieftains were on friendly terms with the Haddocks, but a few, particularly Ali and Grey, were not. The things Grey had said regarding the Haddock twins had been most interesting. It seemed that all the skirmishes in the archipelago that had happened in the last 20 years, the Haddocks had been right in the middle of it. It made sense that some would be frustrated at that. But she didn't think the Haddocks went out of their way to cause trouble. "Right. What are you thinking about?" Genevieve found him watching her, his face relaxed. He faced her more fully, wincing at the pain in his neck. She shrugged. "The meeting. Some interesting things were said in there. Before Clause 17, I mean." Finn frowned, as if trying to remember all the details. "Like what?" Well, she shouldn't feel so nervous to ask, since he'd brought it up, but it was difficult. "Particularly your argument with Grey. About your disappearance and ending up on Rune." "Oh yeah." Finn looked away. He picked up the Sullivan crest lying beside him and flipped it between his fingers, as if he couldn't sit still. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts. "Look," Genevieve said. "I don't want you to tell me if you're not ready. Frostbite still applies." "I think the day of using code names is over," he remarked quietly. Genevieve tried not to feel too shocked or excited by the words. "I don't want you to feel like you have to tell me everything. Or anything for that matter. Jenny, I appreciate that you respect my feelings," Finn said, reaching out and taking her hand. "But, gods, I didn't want to say this here at Mara's. It's like I live here." Genevieve giggled and squeezed his hand, urging him to continue. Finn took a long breath, as if he was nervous. "It made sense to keep some things to myself before, when we were still getting to know each other. But now, it's different." His blue eyes locked onto hers and her breath caught in her chest. I've never had a friend like you. You understand me better than I know myself, and sometimes that scares me a little bit, but it's not a bad thing. Quite the opposite, actually. A blush rose to her face and she found she couldn't hold eye contact for very long. Where did this shyness come from and why did it have to happen now? Finn sat up with a wince and turned so that his knees were on either side of hers. He took her hands and swiped his thumbs across them with a softness he rarely showed. Most people had probably never seen him do anything so gentle. But she supposed that was his point. I don't want to keep my past a secret. Not from you. And there are aspects of it that are, they're a big deal, Finn said. She saw a touch of fear reflected in his eyes. As if afraid that she'd reject him. But I trust you. I want to trust you. And I would really hate for you to find out from the wrong person, or, by accident. Because she'd accidentally walked in on his argument with Inga. Genevieve had never heard of a place called Mayro before, but the way Inga had said it made Genevieve curious despite herself. And the memory of Inga's words, saying that Genevieve couldn't handle him or his past, or that she would tire of him as soon as the novelty of adventure wore off, suddenly made her angry. Inga didn't know her. And she cared about Finn too much to be so shallow. Genevieve straightened in her chair so they were nose to nose. I'm not afraid of your past, whatever it entails. But I promise you right now that no matter what happens, your secrets will be safe with me. I will never use them against you as a bargaining chip to get what I want. Understanding flooded his face, recognizing what she meant. Because whatever their relationship, he'd trusted Inga once. And now she was using whatever means to win him back. As if such a mean thing could regain his affection. She pushed all thoughts of Inga out of her mind when he brushed a curl out of her face. I can't tell you what it does to me, to see you get overprotective of me. Genevieve grinned, resting a hand on his arm. I'm yours and you're mine. Nobody is going to stop that, least of all, Inga. Finn closed the distance between them, his fingers curving around her neck. The kiss was gentle and sweet and brief. He pulled away and pressed his forehead to hers, and she was stunned to see his eyes full of emotion. Thank you. Clearly Inga's betrayal had meant more to him than he'd ever let on. She debated marching out there and giving the girl the tongue lashing she deserved, but she pushed the thoughts out of her mind. It wasn't her place and she need not waste all her thoughts on the other girl. She was the one privileged to earn Finn's trust. She wouldn't lose it by being petty or stuck up herself. She remembered Helga's words from months ago about not breaking Finn's trust or she'd find it extremely hard to win it back again. Now she understood what Helga had meant. I'd be honored to know your whole story, Genevieve said. She brushed a hand through his hair and he leaned into the touch. But take your time. You can always tell me more later. Finn took a deep breath and sighed. Adriana was always better at telling stories than me. Well, she's a bit preoccupied at the moment. Right, Finn said. Well, I'll start at the beginning. It'll be easier if I just start there. And when you say beginning. He grinned, setting her stomach into a burst of flutters. My first birthday. Oh, Genevieve blinked. Worry back then. Finn pinched her waist and she squeaked. Stop that. All right, babe, get comfy, Finn said, sliding backwards until his back rested against the wall. This is going to take a while. Smirking, Genevieve crawled across the bed until she was snuggled into his side. He stiffened in surprise for only a moment before throwing an arm over her shoulders. She sighed in contentment at his warmth and wrapped an arm around his waist. All right, I'm comfy. Finn laughed and the sound rumbled through her. He kissed the top of her head and sighed. Okay, so after my parents got married, they got pregnant with me and Anna pretty quick. Or so we're told. I prefer to not think about the nitty-gritty details. Genevieve snorted but he plowed onward. But apparently it's important because they hadn't even been married for a year when our family went from 2 to 4. Quite the growing family. Sure, listen to the story, Finn said. And back then Dager the deranged apparently decided to show up and cause trouble, like always. He and my dad always had this rivalry, but it only got worse as they got older. Anyway, when my mom was 9 months along, she and my dad had this fight. She took a walk to get away for a bit and Dager kidnapped her. He said it so flippantly, she almost missed it. Genevieve sat bolt upright, nearly knocking her forehead against his nose. What? Oh yeah, Finn said. You saw my dad angry earlier. Apparently he nearly lost it. Finn launched into a tale of Hiccup and his father, Stoic the Vast, and a large gathering of dragon riders rushing to Berserker Island to rescue the heavily pregnant Astrid. He explained how her water had broken while in captivity and Dager, cruel as he was, hadn't allowed her to see a healer. Hiccup had managed to find and rescue her, but she'd been so far along in her contractions that there wasn't enough time to get back to Berk before she was ready to give birth. So we were born on a random speck of land in the outskirts of Berserker territory. Genevieve slapped a hand to her forehead. Is that why everyone always jokes to Adriana about not popping on some random spit of land, like the woods or some god's-forsaken unmanned territory? Yup. It would have been nice if someone had told me that months ago, Genevieve said. The first time Cliff said it I thought it was incredibly rude. Yeah, I suppose without context it would seem a bit mean. Finn agreed. But anyway, that story is important. Remember it. Fast forward a few years. He talked for the longest time. He told her the story of Adriana's kidnapping by their crazy great-aunt Trista and how she'd tried to start a war in the archipelago by setting up Dager. They'd found Adriana in the end and Trista had been given to Berserker Island and executed for her treachery. Then Finn jumped to the next big event of their story. He launched into the tale of Dager the Deranged and the mighty duel Hiccup had narrowly won to save his family from being taken away since they were born in Berserker territory. Genevieve finally understood the ins and outs of the Haddock family, especially why Hiccup was so overprotective. When Hiccup had been shouting at his kids in anger earlier, there had been key elements of the story that she wasn't yet aware of. She'd been shocked at his ferocity. Boy, did she understand it now. Once he finished explaining the direct aftermath of the duel, Finn paused. She assumed that he was merely catching his breath, but at his wrinkled brow, she realized he hadn't yet mentioned anything about his disappearance and trip to Rune. And Gray had said that was 10 years ago. So he would have been 7 years old. Realizing the timeline, she waited. She twisted the leather cords at the V of his shirt while he gathered his thoughts. And then everything changed. What happened? Finn sighed. My dad was different after the duel. He was mean and harsh and we all hated him. Except Anna, of course. Genevieve frowned. Why do you say it like that? Like that's a bad thing. She was his favorite. They understood each other better than I ever did back then. And that's not old bitterness talking, that's just how things were. It strained our relationships because he coddled Anna and didn't talk to the rest of us. Or if he did, he was just mean. Genevieve wondered what the rest of the family would say on the matter but kept her thoughts to herself. Anyway, things got so bad that my parents fought all the time. I hated being at home. And then one particular argument. He frowned at his socks. I don't remember most of it really, I just remember being really angry and my dad saying he was a murderer. From the duel? Genevieve asked. She sat up at his glum look. But he wasn't. It's different. It was kill or be killed in a duel to the death, not cold blood. And technically Dager died by falling off of Toothless. I know that, Finn said softly, meeting her eyes at last. But my dad, he's not a killer. He's not like me where. He exhaled through his nose, as if struggling to find the words. He'll do whatever it takes to do what has to be done, but his preferred method of combat is with the mind, not the sword. If he has to fight, he fights with Toothless, but Toothless couldn't fight this battle for him. He had to physically do whatever it took to win, and when all was said and all was done, he just couldn't handle it. Killing Dager, nearly dying, he'd crossed a line with himself that he shouldn't have crossed, and he hated himself for it. And in his own eyes he felt like a murderer. Genevieve finished. What a horrible thing to go through, and the aftermath, the mental struggles, likely the sleepless nights. Hiccup seemed so strong and unbreakable, but she wondered if that iron will was partially because of those hardships he'd endured. So I left. Genevieve looked up to see him frowning at his lap. You left? Finn nodded. I stowed away on Johann's ship. We were halfway to Rune before he realized I was there. We got there and he told me to stay put and he'd send a terror to my parents. But I had it in my head that I didn't need my family anymore. I was strong enough to take on the world by myself. But you were only 7. Genevieve said. You didn't think I got stubborn as a teenager, did you? Finn gave her a wry smile and shook his head. Oh no, I've been stubborn and brash and stupid from the day I was born. Don't say that. It's true. If I'd just stayed with Johan things would have been fine. Maybe. His brow furrowed. I don't know. Who knows how it all would have turned out. The entire village was about to remove my dad from his position as chief. What? Like I said, dark times in the Haddock household. It was no secret we were struggling as a family. Honestly, who knows what might have happened. Genevieve's mind was reeling. Things had gotten so bad that the village almost took away Hiccup's title. Perhaps she'd judged Finn too harshly. Perhaps he wasn't the only one with dark thoughts about that time period. She shook her head. You said if you'd stayed with Johan things would have been fine. That's when you ran away then. Finn nodded. He warned me to stay close but I didn't listen. I had dreams of grandeur to make a better life with no family, no one to tell me what to do. He shook his head in mock amusement. I lost Johan and eventually ran into this guy named Jarvan. He said I seemed like a good, strong kid who needed a place to stay until I got my bearings. So he promised me food and lodgings while I figured out my next steps. Naturally it seemed like a good idea, so I went with him. Genevieve felt a strong sense of foreboding. He took me to the shipyard, which was pretty rough looking. Lots of sailors and massive ships, some of them 4 times the size of the biggest in our fleet. Finn shook his head and slowly met her eyes. Her heartbeat picked up in her chest. Pirates. Finn shook his head, a strange sort of fear lighting his eyes. It was a slave ship. Her breath hitched in her chest. His ears and neck flamed red and he looked away, not only in fear but also in shame. Genevieve stared and waited for that sly grin to rise to his face, for him to say just kidding or gotcha. But he didn't. With every passing moment, his shoulders seemed to slump and that bright blue light in his eyes seemed to dim. Suddenly, everything made sense. His passion for slaves, to keep the spread of the slave trade from spreading throughout the archipelago. How he'd likely met Binen, a former slave whom Hiccup had freed. The Fortis necklace that Binen had given him, a symbol of strength. Why he'd panicked in that cave on Jet and felt so uncomfortable in the stone caverns. Why his back was covered in scars. Without realizing, her eyes had filled with tears. You were a slave. He wouldn't look at her but with each passing second, his eyes turned glassy. I was just a stupid kid they snatched off the street. Like so many. They dragged me onto the ship and hit me when I tried to fight. They branded me like an animal and locked me in chains with a bunch of others beneath the ship. We left Rune behind and... He rubbed his face and Genevieve fought the shaking in her hands as she rested them on his arm. I don't know how long I was on the ship exactly, but the next time I saw daylight I was on another island. It was a place called Mayro, far away from here. They lined me up with a bunch of other people. He lowered his hands and shook his head in disgust. People haggled on prices for people, like they were fighting over a prize horse. It was only when the crowd got more ferocious that... His voice caught and he swallowed hard. That Ratri showed up. He was richer than most people, though I honestly have no idea how. He outbid everyone. I didn't know how much I was sold for because I didn't understand Latin, but I knew it was a high price because everyone else looked angry about it. So I went with Ratri. Tears cascaded down Genevieve's face, her heart burning in her chest in anger and pain as he told her the rest of the story. How Ratri, the disgusting man, had beat a 7-year-old boy enough to cause the skin of his back to split. When he mentioned the scars, she couldn't stay silent. I know about the scars. Finn gave her a wide-eyed look of surprise and she smiled sheepishly. Do you remember that one time I went to the loft and you didn't have a shirt on? Finn blinked and then gave her a slow smile. Were you checking me out then? Who walks around without a shirt on? I do all the time. It's your own fault for barging in on me. Yeah, Genevieve said. Anyway, I was so concerned but I somehow managed to keep my mouth shut. I didn't want to embarrass you. Finn's amusement faded. Yeah, thank you for that. If you'd brought it up, well, embarrassed would be a nice way to put it. Genevieve crossed her legs. So, then what happened? Well, let me think. I guess after one particularly cruel beating, I'd been stubborn all week, but I was quickly getting overwhelmed. I almost broke down. A small smile lit up his face. And Benin came inside. He was nearly stooped over with age and his skin was so weathered, he had wrinkles everywhere, but his eyes were soft and kind. He helped me off the floor and gave me a hug, and when he pulled away, he pointed at my heart. Finn mimicked the gesture. And he whispered one word, Fortis. Strong. Genevieve whispered. They were silent for a few moments. Genevieve wiped her face again while Finn was caught up in memories. The sun had long since gone down and she felt the beginnings of hunger, but she wasn't going to stop his story now. Finn blinked and shook himself. Things got a little easier after that. He explained that Rattray had wanted him to learn more discipline, so he'd set Finn up with a job at the local mines. When she found out all the horrible things he'd endured there, Genevieve huffed at herself in irritation. I'm so sorry. Don't be. Finn shrugged. How could you possibly know? Even I didn't know I was going to have that sort of reaction. I know, but I still feel bad. Don't worry about it. But anyway, this is where the story gets interesting, Finn said, a strange new excitement in his voice. Apparently one of the days I was out, my dad and Fishlegs showed up at Rattray's. Genevieve gasped. What? No. How is that possible? My dad tracked me down. They found Javan and gave him a piece of their minds and figured out where I was taken. Naturally Rattray wouldn't just give me up or tell them my location, and if they'd just taken me then they'd be in big trouble. At Genevieve's confused look, his excitement withered. Because slaves are property. It's a legal transaction. To just take me home would have been stealing. Genevieve's skin turned hot with rage. She could feel the flush rise to her face as she struggled for words. That's just, they can't just, they're people. Finn nodded. Trust me, no one understands that more than I do. Anyway, it was apparently late, so Rattray told them to come back the next day. Fishlegs convinced my dad to set up camp nearby. And I don't quite know what happened because my dad wouldn't tell me, but Fishlegs told me later that my dad had a horrible nightmare that night. Like, really bad, worse than any he'd had before. And for whatever reason, it helped him to stop being so angry and depressed. That's interesting, Genevieve said slowly. What sort of nightmare? Finn winced. Fishlegs wouldn't tell me. And when I asked my dad about the nightmare, he went a little pale and just shook his head. Like he didn't even have words to explain if he wanted to. He crossed his arms and paused. Actually, huh? What? Genevieve shook his arm. Don't leave me in suspense. What? After we found out Brandine was Dager's son, my dad had a bad nightmare. Like, he woke up screaming kind of thing. Oh, that's so sad. Well, I only mention it because I had the guts to ask him about it and he actually told me. Something about how he'd lost the duel, me and Anna had died, and then my mom killed herself. Finn, that's... Genevieve stared. That's horrible. Yeah. I don't know if it was the same nightmare or not, but whatever the case, something changed after that. Finn proceeded to explain that after everything he'd been through, Rattray had left him in a cave and caused a rockslide, trapping him in the dark. And somehow his dad had found him by calling his name and struggling through the dark. After everything that had happened, the relief he'd felt at his dad coming for him had been monumental. Wow, Genevieve said. That is quite the story. Finn elbowed her in the ribs. You're one of the few who knows it. She smiled. Now she understood his sudden breakdown and discomfort in the caves, and it also explained why Helga, who'd been one of his closest friends for most of his life, had no recollection of it. So your dad rescued you and I assume brought you back from Rattray? Yes, and Benin. He took us both home and we all apologized to each other. The family grew closer and Binnen was finally free after decades of slavery. And for a few years, everything was really good. By the tone of his voice, she knew that more devastation was coming. It took a long time of explaining and she did her best not to interrupt, but she soon learned about the sickness that had swept through many of the tribes and taken many lives, including Eric's father, Olaf. It had very nearly claimed Astrid and Finn also, while Hiccup and Adriana had embarked on a journey to find a cure. They'd returned mere hours after Olaf Larsson had passed away and Eric had blamed Adriana for his death. They didn't speak for a long time after that. Finn said. It was a hard loss, losing Olaf. He was a good man. Something in his voice caught Genevieve's attention and she sat up. He looked so depressed. Were you close to him? No. But he wasn't the only one we lost after that. Finn took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Once I got better, I volunteered to help dismantle an old barn of some friends. It had been damaged in a storm and was going to collapse. So Binnen went with me to start working on it and my dad planned to meet us there after taking Adriana to the library. Genevieve swallowed. We went inside the barn and started clearing away debris. And his breath hitched in his throat. All I remember is this creaking sound and being pushed out of the way. There was the sound of crashing and splitting wood. I turned around and Binnen was buried. Oh no, Genevieve clapped a hand to her mouth. I dug him out as best I could, but when I finally found him. Finn shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. He'd been impaled. There was nothing we could do for him. Tears splashed down his face, even as he shook his head as if in denial of the event even years later. The last thing he said to me, he coughed a strangled laugh, was that everything was going to be okay and it wasn't my fault. But it was. It should have been me. Her face wet with tears, Genevieve pulled him into a hug and held him tightly, still aware enough to mind his neck. No. It might feel that way, but he was such a good man and he loved you so much. She pulled back and pressed her hands to the sides of his face, even as more tears slipped down her cheeks. She shook her head and smiled, swiping his tears away with her thumbs. Now I understand why everyone speaks of him so fondly. He was a hero. In so many ways. Finn sniffed and nodded. As hard as the slavery was, as hard as it still is, it wasn't so bad when he was there. He always had a positive way of looking at things. He always encouraged us to stay humble and be kind. He pushed a curl off her cheek and seemed to be fighting his emotions. I just wish I could tell him how grateful I am. That as terrible as slavery was, it was worth it for him. And it's because of him that I know what I want to do in my career, more than just take care of my own people. A new, firm look appeared in his eyes, cutting through the emotion. I want to free slaves. I want to give them a new life, a fresh start from the horrors they've endured. I want to show them that slavery won't conquer them and that they can be strong too, just like Binnen was for me. A new warmth bloomed in her heart, something unlike anything else she'd ever felt. Seeing his passion for something so selfless and good, it filled her with such joy. You will, Genevieve said, nodding. He knew you were meant for great things, so he wanted to prepare you early. He wanted a hand in shaping this heart of wildfire. She pressed a hand to his chest. Finn breathed a laugh and tugged on a curl at her shoulder. He bit his lip and gave her a sheepish, awkward smile. What? Genevieve said, lowering her arms. See what you did. You made me cry. What I did not. That was all you. Finn rubbed his face and sharply gasped, briefly touching the bandages then circling his neck. So after Binnen died. Oh my God, Genevieve said, aghast. Surely there isn't more. Hey, I was 13 when Binnen died, Finn said indignantly. That gives us 3 more years of drama. If everyone else can endure it, so can you. Genevieve sighed and turned her back on him before laying backwards so her head was in his lap. He blinked down at her in surprise before shrugging and twisting his fingers into her hair. She hummed and closed her eyes. Well, go on then, part 7. Snorting, Finn tried his best to summarize everything that had happened in the years after Binnen died. The anger and hate that had built inside him at himself, at his dad, at Binnen for leaving him. How he'd become obsessed with control and identifying strength like a bully would. He even went so far as to admit that he'd manhandled Helga, though he quickly added that he'd apologized later and they'd mended as much of their friendship as they could. He'd been the leader of a gang that had torn their village apart. It had been months of tricking the council and his own parents, leading them on daring conquests and trashing important parts of the village just to make a statement or prove that he could. He added that a raid from a group of wild dragons had torched a portion of the village and Eric's sister and brother-in-law had been lost in the flames, further putting Eric in a terrible mental state. Genevieve kept her questions brief, but she remembered upon meeting Eric for the first time that he'd mentioned losing his father and sister had both been extremely hard and trying times. She had a feeling that there was more to it than either boy had admitted, but she held her tongue. This was Finn's story, not Eric's. He'd somehow roped Eric into joining the gang, and after nearly killing villagers, including an infant, the gang had backed off. Hiccup had gone nearly berserk. But Finn had still decided to push him and try to get away with one last hit. The Great Hall? Genevieve demanded, looking up at him in shock. Were you insane? I told you I was stupid. The gang had been captured and thrown in jail. They'd been caught because Eric snitched. Finn had hated Eric and his parents, but he admitted that at the heart of it all, he hated himself more. He explained how he'd busted out of jail and sought out Eric at the mill, and they'd fought. Genevieve actually let out a small scream when he told her what happened to Eric's foot at the mill. Whatever story she had expected to hear as to what had happened to his leg, she never would have guessed the truth was so gruesome and horrific. Finn didn't go into lengthy details about the immediate aftermath, for which she was quite grateful, but he continued, explaining that he had thought he'd killed Eric and felt the weight of his actions crushing him so much he'd had to run away again. He'd paused only once, seeming to gather his thoughts, before launching into how he'd finally met Ratri again, after 8 years, and been tempted to kill him. But I remembered Benin, Finn said. He was always talking about choices, how we make them every day. Some days have some small choices, but others are the crossroads of life, where the next choice you make will decide your future. He exhaled heavily. I wasn't in a good place, but somehow I remembered Benin and I chose to let him go. Genevieve felt the tension leave her shoulders. If Finn had murdered the old man, cruel as he was, well, I'm glad to hear that you let him go. Benin would have wanted me to show him mercy. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. So after that Finn swallowed and took a deep breath. I went to a tiny island with a cliff and... He shook his head. I was so depressed and alone, and I hated myself. I was thoroughly convinced my dad would never let me come home again. My life had little purpose anymore. I sent a message to my parents saying I was never coming home, and by the time they found me, it would be too late. Heart thundering, Genevieve sat up. You were going to, but you didn't. A small smile pulled at his lips, a crackle of humor lighting in his blue eyes. Obviously. Or aren't you so keen to know that all this time you've been dating a zombie? Finn, that's not funny. You're right, sorry. He said, but that smile refused to fade. But before I could decide what to do, I heard something. What? Genevieve breathed. He grinned at how involved she was in the story and feigned a long stretch, wincing at his injuries. Wow, look at the time. Genevieve grabbed the pillow and half-heartedly slapped him in the chest. Do not tease me. Fearless Finn. Ow, okay. Geese, he laughed. I heard a cry of pain. Not human, distinctly dragon. And being raised by the man who is my father, I couldn't very well leave a dragon in a trap. Excited, Genevieve squeezed the pillow to her chest. Oh, I have a suspicion. Don't spoil the story. Finn hissed. So I ran through the woods until I found her, a baby Zap caught in a trap. I knew it. Genevieve cheered. Was she tiny? Nah, she was about half her size now, under a year old. I freed her from the trap, though she gave me a good zap. Luckily she didn't mean anything by it. That's where her name comes from. But then she sort of, this is going to sound insane. Try me. Well, she sort of told me to go back home. Go home? Yeah, some female dragons, when they start ushering their young into the nest, they grab them by the scruff of the neck and carry them away. Well, that's what she did with me. I had a dragonist conversation and somehow she convinced me that, even if my dad didn't want me back, even if Eric had died, even if my family never wanted to see me again, at least I'd tried. Finn continued with the story, how he'd come home and Hiccup had tearfully embraced him. He'd been so sure that he'd be kicked out for good and disowned, but the relief at being wrong, at how his father loved him and wanted him to never leave again. Then how he'd had to let Tornado go and then Zap had returned and he'd had to train her. Then what happened? Genevieve breathed. These stories never have a happy ending for long. Finn shook his head with a sad sort of smile on his lips. You don't have to tell me that twice. But really, that's where my story ended until Anna got pregnant. Life was pretty much normal. Well said, Genevieve. I know the story up until there. Shame. Finn stared up at her, his soft blue eyes reflecting the candlelight. Because that's the best part and I wanted to talk about this sexy Jatan I met. Genevieve smacked his uninjured shoulder. Stop it. Her gorgeous brown eyes and her absolutely perfect pink lips and her. Why would you want to talk about her? She sounds awfully dull. Finn let out a playful growl and pulled her closer. She's hardly dull. She's fun and witty and smart. Genevieve pushed a hand to his lips. Stop. With a flash of amusement in his eyes, Finn's tongue darted out and licked the expanse of her hand. Genevieve lurched back with a squeal, wiping her hand on his arm even as he laughed. You are so disgusting. I don't know, Finn said, giving her a sly smirk. My tongue has been in far naughtier places. Heat rose to her face and she looked away, trying to ignore the tingles rushing over her skin as he leaned in and kissed the soft space below her ear. You're insufferable. But what can I say? She said when he pulled away just enough for their eyes to meet. This girl's incredibly dull life only got interesting when a certain heir to Burke flew into her life. Finn leaned in closer. That's the spirit. Their lips met and they kissed slowly, hands roaming though she was careful not to touch his neck. Still he pulled away after a few short minutes with a hiss. I'm going to kill Brandine, not least of which is the fact that I can't move well enough to kiss you properly. Genevieve bit her lip. Well, I guess I'll have to make up for your loss. Call it a part of your healing process. One might call it physical therapy. Oh gods. Finn laughed, the sound reverberating along her bones. He kissed the shell of her ear and pulled away with a sigh. No, but really, this sucks. I'm going to need some sort of tonic for the pain if it doesn't go away soon. Genevieve nodded. She settled against his shoulder and thought of his story, the Haddock family history. It really was no small affair when Helga and Eric and Cliff had told her to be careful with the questions she asked. She was infinitely glad that she'd heeded their advice, that she hadn't prodded him for information on his past. She wouldn't have been worthy. But, he'd been a slave. She thought back to the time when they'd sat atop the rock at the cliffside, one of her favorite spots on Jut, and she'd asked him what it felt like to be free. He'd gotten this strange look in his eyes, something bordering on pain. She'd craved freedom in different ways, but oh how her question had likely spoken to him in a way she never could have fathomed. He'd then showed her a world of freedom which gave her opportunity to be herself and to thrive. Now she understood just how important freedom was to him. How he couldn't stand the idea of anyone being locked up against their will, even in the small things. Genevieve sat up, her eyes sweeping his skin. Finn must have seen her puzzled expression because he asked, "What? You said?" Genevieve pursed her lips, suddenly nervous. "You said they branded you." Finn's eyes locked on hers. He nodded. "Where is it?" If she hadn't seen him bare from the waist up before, she might have assumed it was on his chest or his back. But she wasn't prepared for Finn to turn his face to the side and lift up his hair. Her breath faltered at the sight of the curving slave mark that had been burned into the skin behind his temple. His hair fell in just the right way so that it was hidden. Gingerly she reached up and touched it, the skin rough and scarred. It would have been insanely painful. And he'd only been 7 when they'd held him down and done this to him. She hated the bleak look in his eyes. Genevieve leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his temple, right over the mark. Finn stiffened, but when she pulled away, he was looking at her in shock. "This," she whispered, tracing the mark. doesn't define you. A soft look filled his eyes then, something she couldn't quite define. It was perhaps a mixture of peace and gratitude, but it seemed too imploring to simply be that. Before she could put a finger on it, he closed his eyes and dropped his brow to her shoulder. She slipped her arms around his broad shoulders, even as his arms slid around her waist. How long had it been since he'd talked to someone about all of this? It seemed that he'd been able to talk about it with his family on mild terms, but not to this extent. Perhaps not since Binnen had died. They sat like that for many minutes until Finn stirred. He carved a line up her neck with his nose, sending goosebumps and tingles across her skin. His blue eyes were stark in the dim room, lit only by candlelight. He gently brushed a curl off her cheek. "I love you, Genevieve Sullivan." Her heart stopped and started again. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, that hadn't been it. "You don't have to say it back," he said quietly. "But I've been thinking about it for a long time, and this whole conversation was the real test. To see if I could tell you about some of the greatest mistakes and horrors of my life and see how you would handle it. I didn't think I'd ever find someone who wouldn't chastise or hate me for my mistakes. Or leave because of what I used to be, as a person and as a former slave." He brushed a thumb down her cheek. "I love you, Jenny." Genevieve couldn't help the bright smile. Her heart felt so light and burned with such happiness she felt quite faint. "I'm not saying it back out of obligation. I love you too, Finn. More than I ever thought I could." Finn smiled then, brighter than any star. He kissed her then, pulling her closer than he ever had before. Or perhaps it felt closer than it ever had been before because their relationship was stronger. He'd entrusted to her all of his secrets and she understood him better. She didn't hate him. In fact, she'd seen his journey with clarity and could now see why he was the man he was today, based off his experiences and the people who'd gone on that journey with him. He'd experienced loss and pain greater than most people had in their entire lifetime. And yet he was still kind and passionate and hardworking. He still put himself on the line to protect those he loved, and he wanted to save as many people from slavery as he could while he still had breath. He loved his family. He loved his people. And he loved her. Somehow she felt like everything that had happened thus far had led them to this moment, and now it was time for a new beginning. Inga stared at the letter and read the lines multiple times, memorizing the exact instructions from Mara and the chief. She was to send Finn and Genevieve with the armed guard to the Haddock and Sullivan houses, and she herself would take a set of guards to the Larson house with supplies. It would appear to anyone snooping around that she was with the couple at home, keeping an eye on things. People would assume that Adriana was going to have her baby, and Hiccup wanted everyone to know where Adriana was, judging by the healer going in with supplies and the heavily armed guards posted around the entire house. A decoy. That's what she would be tonight. And by gods, she'd do it to the best of her ability. Inga gathered up as many supplies as she could and double-checked that her daggers were concealed, one in the inner folds of her vest, the other tucked in her boot. The third at her belt was purely for decoration. Running through all the things she needed to do, Inga almost forgot the first order of business until she heard a laugh from behind the closed door. She almost groaned. She had to talk to Finn and Genevieve. In the hours they'd been cooped up in the room, Inga had sat in silence while working, forcing herself not to think about what they might be up to. But it seemed like they were just talking. And more than once, she heard Finn laugh. She paused in stuffing a wide roll of clean rags in her healer's bag. Finn had laughed. Truly laughed. She hadn't heard him laugh like that in a long time. And perhaps, she thought, it wasn't because he hadn't laughed. Maybe, she swallowed. Maybe she'd been so stubborn and angry and jealous, maybe she'd refused to notice. To notice, or care, that he was happy. A pit of shame yawned beneath her. She sat down in the nearest chair with a thump, frowning at her work supplies. For so long, she'd tried to get his attention. For a while, it had worked too. All summer long, it seemed like things were going smoothly. They'd been talking and joking, not just bickering. The day she'd run into him in the woods and he'd nearly chopped her in half with his battle axe seemed like eons ago. But that had just been in the summer. Things had changed so quickly. He'd changed. There had been a spark there, she knew there had. And yet, for some reason, he'd decided not to act on that spark. She'd been unfair in the way she'd clung to him. Clung to the hope that they'd get together even after he said no. And while it had hurt, he'd been honest. Perhaps there was value in that. She'd let her emotions get the best of her, and when she'd found out that he'd found that Jatan girl, when he'd found Genevieve, it had felt like betrayal. But truthfully, he'd never promised her anything. She wasn't being fair. Maybe things could have worked out in time, but as of right now, he had Genevieve. And he was happy. Maybe down the road, if things didn't work out with Genevieve, maybe they could try again. Inga snorted and rolled her eyes. Wishful thinking. And highly unlikely. She'd seen the way Finn had smiled at her earlier, the way she'd held his hand like he was the very ground she walked on. To have such a stable relationship, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Sure, it still hurt. Sure, she still wanted to be with him deep down. But she'd finally realized the error of her ways when Genevieve had caught her in the argument with Finn. The anger written on the Jatan girl's face had been justified, based on the things Inga had said to him. About him, about his relationship with Genevieve, and about Genevieve's own character. She had no right. Swallowing past the lump in her throat, Inga gauged the time by the shifting darkness outside and hurried to gather the last few items to take to the Larson house. She needed to hurry. After some great length of time bustling around and straightening things, however, Inga knew she was stalling. The family wanted Finn and Genevieve to be at their houses before nightfall, and she needed to get to the Larsons. She'd wasted enough time. So squaring her shoulders, Inga stalked to the door and knocked loudly. The conversation on the other side of the door faltered. There was a rustling, and then Genevieve opened the door, looking a little ruffled perhaps, but still rather put together. Inga's stomach churned, hoping as Finn straightened his shirt that they hadn't been deep in the throes of passion whilst. Yes? Genevieve asked. Her dark eyes darted to the table behind Inga and she added, "Is it Adriana? Has she had the baby yet?" Finn demanded. No, Inga said, and she quickly explained what they were supposed to do next. "We need to leave quickly. They're expecting us." Finn scowled, sliding to the edge of the bed. "Why aren't they letting you come to my place?" Inga looked at Genevieve, who looked at her as well. "Oh, do you mean me?" Genevieve asked him in surprise. "Or Inga? She's a healer, after all." Oh, Finn blushed. Well, both." Inga rolled her eyes. "Because I'm the Dickoe. If Brandine or any of his cronies go sniffing around, they'll find Eric and Anna's house heavily guarded with me and Cliff's mom inside. They look so alike, they're nearly identical. Giving every Haddock's absence tonight, it won't take long for them to figure out what's going on. The whole family won't go into mourning just because you got a boo-boo." She expected Genevieve to scowl or have a retort, but instead she snorted. She gathered up her sweater that had fallen on the floor and put it on. "Indeed. Brandine's smart. He'll figure out she's having the baby soon enough. And as for me," she added to Finn. "If I was Adriana, I wouldn't want extra ears listening in while I'm giving birth." "No, you would not." Inga agreed. "I'll grab my stuff and then we need to go. Actually, how are your bandages?" "I'm fine," Finn said as he stood. "Honest. If I need anything I'll ask, whoever is available." "That would be your dad or Lara Larson." "Oh, great." Genevieve giggled and took his arm while they walked to the door. Inga eyed his stiff movements, noting how he seemed to walk a bit gingerly. She wondered if that was from the kick he'd taken to his stomach or general soreness. She shoved aside her analytical thoughts and grabbed her bags before following them to the door. Then as Genevieve grabbed the handle, she blurted, "Wait." They turned with equal looks of surprise. "About earlier?" Inga said, face heating. Gods, what was she doing? She hadn't thought this through, curse her blunt, brash tongue. Even now as she floundered with what to say, Finn stiffened, a warning look in his eyes. Yet Genevieve leveled a cool look back at her, waiting patiently for her to speak. She swallowed. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things." She met Finn's eyes and that's when she saw it. That warning look morphing into something sad and hurt. Her desired romance with him aside, they had been friends. For a long time, longer than she'd ever had a crush on him. And she'd hurt him. Despite herself, her eyes burned. "I'm sorry. I had no right." A warm smile pulled at Genevieve's face, but she said nothing, instead turning those dark midnight eyes up at Finn. He looked wary, cautious. No doubt stubbornly trying to think of a way to kick her to the curb without invoking the wrath of his girlfriend. At long last, he swallowed and dipped his chin. Inga blinked in surprise. Though he said nothing, she watched as the caution cleared from his expression and he gave her a small smile. She'd thought he'd say something, say lots of things. He truly had changed. Things were different now. And maybe some of those changes were because of the girl standing beside him. Genevieve held out a hand. "Start over." Inga stared at the thin fingers being extended. She searched for any sign of anger in Genevieve's eyes and came up empty. So with a smile of her own, she shook her hand. "I'd like that." A small smile tugged one side of Finn's face as he watched. For some reason, it looked like an expression of pride. Genevieve nodded, then unabashedly took his hand. "Well, we really should go if they're expecting us. Before His Majesty falls asleep on the threshold." Hey, Finn's blue eyes darted away from Inga to Genevieve. "I'm not tired." "Please," Inga said, despite the tide of emotions locked in her chest. "You've already had one all-nighter and you're about to have a second. Go home and get some sleep while you can, Finn." She smirked. "You're about to be an uncle." His expression melted into surprise and Inga found herself laughing with Genevieve. "Come on, let's go," Genevieve said, opening the door and pulling him outside. "See you later, Inga." Inga followed but remained on the porch, taking a minute to catch her breath, steady her emotions. Finn didn't give people second chances often, but that look he'd given her, that dip of the chin, she knew his tells, his language, how he spoke. Maybe he wasn't going to have a lengthy argument about it, but she knew what that little look meant. He forgave her. Inga knew she didn't deserve it with how rotten she'd been as of late. But she resolved to do better. She couldn't live in anger and bitter jealousy forever. She had to move on and be happy. She was too young and awesome to let such a thing ruin her life. Not to mention she'd barely spoken 2 words to Alton for weeks. He was set to return to the high seas with Johan soon. She needed to apologize to him too, make amends before he was gone and wouldn't return until the peak of summer. She had many things to do, but for the first time in a long while, Inga faced them with a clear head. And as she watched Finn and Genevieve disappear into the darkness hand in hand amongst their band of armored guards, she felt something in her heart loosen, and with a blink and a smile, she let him go. Mara had said walking around would make things easier. She'd said it would speed up the process, that gravity would help the baby come out faster. Well, Adriana wanted to tell Mara to take that advice and stuff if where the sun didn't shine, because it had been hours and she'd barely made any progress. At first, with a calming tea and a comfortable bed, she and Eric had actually managed to fall asleep. When they woke, it was dusk. This would have been much better in the middle of summer, when the sun didn't descend into the horizon until late into the evening, but in late winter, it just made the night seem eternally longer. Then Mara had checked Adriana's progress again and declared that things hadn't progressed very much. "These things take time," Mara had said at her groan. "Easy for you to say," Adriana grumbled, sitting up so that she rested against the backboard of the bed. "You've never given birth." "You're right," Mara agreed. "I'm not going to pretend I know what you're going through, Anna. But you need to be patient. Stressing over how long it takes will only make the seconds tick by slower. If you want to speed up the process, walk around and let gravity do the work." And so she had. Adriana and Eric had circled the room over and over and over, stopping every few minutes as the pains came back once again. "Ah, this is ridiculous," Adriana said through gritted teeth as yet another pain finally ebbed. "It feels like it's been hours and it's only been like 10 minutes. Eric glanced out the window at the moon rising high into the night sky. "Do you want me to close the curtains?" Adriana considered this for a moment. "No," she said at last. "I want to know the time. I just hate that it's going so slowly." "Well, you're doing amazingly. You really are." Eric brushed her bangs out of the way and kissed her forehead. "Ha," Adriana scoffed. "I haven't done anything yet, Yes, you have, Eric said. You've had a long hard day and you haven't fallen to pieces. You stood up to Brandine and Ali in the Great Hall, you even went to the duel, and when your water broke you stayed calm. That's amazing. Adriana felt a rush of affection for her husband. She couldn't imagine doing this alone. Well, it helps that I have such a faithful husband to hold my hand. Eric beamed and kissed her forehead chastely. I wouldn't have it any other way. Sliding her arms around his waist, Adriana pressed her face into his neck. He rubbed his hands up and down her spine and she hummed at the pressure, the warmth. Imagine if I'd made it to Bog after all. I'd have random people that I don't know helping me. I wouldn't have my parents. I wouldn't have you. Eric shrugged. I don't really know what I'd do in your situation, so I'm not sure I can blame you. He put his arm around her shoulders and squeezed. I'm so glad you came back, Annie. I was so scared that something would happen to you and the baby. He pulled her even closer. Adriana felt a pang that had nothing to do with the baby. Guilt clawed at her insides. What she'd put Eric through was nothing short of torture. She remembered well sitting in his room after he'd lost his foot while he was still unconscious. She'd spent so much time crying and pleading with the gods to let him live. Gods, she loved him so much. How could she ever have gone on a single date with Brandine when a part of her had always known that she and Eric had something between them that she couldn't share with anyone else? If she'd seen it sooner, she wouldn't be hours away from giving birth, she might not even be in this situation for a few years at all, and she would be giving birth to his own flesh and blood instead of his adopted child. The fact that he was willing to give all that up with someone new, the fact that he did any of this by choice. He must have read the unspoken words on her face because he pulled away. Hey now, none of that. Eric ran his fingers through her hair. It all worked out in the end, didn't it? How did you? I can always tell when your thoughts go dark because your lips start to pucker, Eric said. A small smirk rose to his face and he added, I have to keep my lips to myself when you do that, but maybe if I didn't then it would be another way to help you think happy thoughts. Adriana pushed him in the chest, though she couldn't help the smile. Ake, you spend too much time with Finn. Eric grinned and steered her down the hall with an arm around her waist. Do you want a rest? Adriana stared at the bed inside the room, at all the healer supplies lying in wait for the baby's arrival. Yes, she dearly wanted a rest. From this pregnancy, from the pains, from the stupid convocation, from the guilt over what she'd done and what she'd let other people do to her. No, she said. I can keep going. Why don't you go downstairs? Mara asked, entering the hall. As long as you're careful on the stairs. You're not far enough along yet that there's risk of not making it upstairs again. Adriana gazed down the stairs and nodded. Good idea. Perhaps gravity will work double time. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Eric said hastily before folding her arm to his chest and leading her down the stairs. She felt a bit ridiculous, walking downstairs in the thin shift Mara had asked her to put on beneath her favorite fluffy robe. With her hair piled high atop her head and her feet bare, she felt quite out of sorts by comparison to her usual attire. But she supposed she was quite comfortable in the get-up. As they neared the bottom of the stairs, the pain hit her sharply and she gasped. Eric held her arms through it all, even as she panted and gritted her teeth through it. Second after second passed and still the pain raged. Oh my goods, Adriana hissed into Eric's shoulder. Maybe we should go back upstairs, she heard him say through the pain, but she clutched his arms, unable to move an inch, let alone go back upstairs. Insufferable men and their stupid conceptions of being able to move at a time like this. Finally it banked, the pain slowly ebbing to a dull throb. Adriana took a few long deep breaths. You, that was a big one. Eric's expression was nothing short of concerned. Let's go back upstairs. No, I'm okay. I'm okay. Gotta keep moving. Annie. Eric, I'm fine, she insisted, gingerly dropping off the last step and starting into a gentle walk. I'll take a few minutes around and then we'll go back. Mara tramped down the stairs with Astrid a moment later, both watching with concerned looks. Adriana ignored them, allowing Eric to lead her around the room. She fought a flare of temper. All of them watching her like a bunch of mother hens was getting a bit frustrating. Without warning, the front door burst open with a bang, narrowly missing Eric. The biggest mother hen of them all had finally arrived. Her daddy was out of breath, snow clinging to his hair, but he smiled at the sight of his daughter and son-in-law. "Everything okay?" he asked through deep breaths. "Can I get you anything?" Adriana sniffed. "You can sit down before you pass out." "Wow, that never occurred to me," Hiccup deadpanned back. "Seriously, Addie, if you need anything, I can go." "Sit down." Adriana gestured to a nearby chair, where Hiccup reluctantly sat. "I have everything I need and more than enough people pestering me. If you stay wound up like this the entire time, you're going to." Her breath hitched in her chest. She tried to fight it, but soon she was clutching her belly, forgetting the sights and sounds of where she was. The only thing she could think was how soon this contraction was compared to the last one. Sweat was on her upper lip when it finally passed, enough for her to see her surroundings again. She couldn't remember squeezing her eyes shut. She also didn't recall her dad disobeying her orders to sit down by taking up a spot at her side opposite of Eric, gently rubbing her back while her husband held her hands tightly. Hiccup opened his mouth, but Eric silenced him with a look, probably because she'd snipped at him half an hour earlier for talking while she was concentrating on breathing. "I'm okay," she said when she felt like speaking again. She'd gotten used to saying this after every contraction because if she didn't, Eric would fuss. The stress would wear him out regardless of what had been going on over the last few days, but she suddenly remembered that he'd spent most of the night looking through the laws with Finn. Despite the nap they'd taken a while ago, dark smudges were beneath his eyes. "You should get some rest, babe. You were up all night." "It wasn't all night." Eric brushed a few stray hairs behind her ear. "And besides, I got a few winks earlier. You'll be up all night tonight. I'm not going to just crash while you're having a baby." "It's fine." Adriana patted his chest with her hand. "We'll wake you when things progress, but I really don't want you falling asleep while I'm giving birth." "As if that's even a remote possibility," Eric interrupted. "And you know I went to bed early last night," Adriana interrupted. "One night of no sleep isn't going to finish me off." Eric opened his mouth to argue, closed it, then looked imploringly at Hiccup. As if he expected Hiccup to insist he stay by her side all night long. She felt a rush of irritation. Was he really asking her dad to side with him instead of listening to her? To her immense satisfaction, Hiccup said, "She's right. Listen to your wife, Eric. You were up all night helping Finn and now you're going to be up most of the night helping Addie. Get some shut-eye while you still can." "But the contractions are progressing," Eric argued. "And we'll wake you up if anything happens," Hiccup said. "I promise." Eric looked like he wanted to argue, but Adriana forced him to meet her eyes. "Eric, you're exhausted. There's nothing to do right now, we're still just waiting. They'll come and get you when things pick up. But I want you to be wide awake when our baby is born." He didn't seem to like it, but the last words made a small, begrudging smile rise to his face. He sighed heavily. "Fine, I'll crash in Cliff's room." He turned firm teal eyes on Hiccup and the women present. "But the second anything happens, you'll know about it, son," Lara said primly from an armchair where she'd been folding laundry. Hiccup stiffened at the sight, no doubt wondering why Lara Larson was folding his family's laundry and discomfort at some particular garments. Adriana snorted and gently pushed Eric toward the stairs. "Go, I'll be fine." Before she could move him a step, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her firmly. She blinked in surprise. Very rarely did he kiss her like this in front of other people, let alone her family. It was brief, however, and he brushed her hair out of her eyes when he pulled away. "I love you." Adriana couldn't help the smile. "I love you too, babe." He gave her a warm smile before pulling away and trotting up the stairs, likely forcing himself to take every step because his instincts told him to stay put. But he didn't stop, respecting their wishes to lie down for a while until things were farther along. Still, when her old bedroom door snicked shut upstairs and the house was strangely quiet amongst all these people, she felt a bit strange. Like a piece of her was missing. But she didn't have long to ponder it because another shooting pain rose up from the depths of her belly and she inhaled sharply through her nose as she grabbed her belly. "It's okay," her dad said, leaning her against the back of the couch and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Just breathe, baby." Adriana clenched her jaw and vaguely registered pressing her brow into his armored shoulder, barely felt his other arm come around her shoulders to hold her close. Gods, it was agony, sharp and unending, and it wasn't just in her belly like she'd always assumed, it was in her back and hips too. She was just about to shout for Eric to forget it and come back downstairs, and she stubbornly clamped down on the desire. He couldn't do anything for her any more than the others could. Finally the spell broke and she could breathe again, and despite herself she could feel the prick of tears rising in each breath. "It just keeps getting worse," she said, the pitch of her voice rising. She swallowed hard, trying to push it back, to remove the emotions from the equation, but she'd never been good at doing that. Still, no amount of preparation had been good enough for this. And it was still just the beginning. The pains were only now just worsening. "I'm not ready for this, I'm not." "Hey," Hiccup said, cupping her face in his scarred, calloused hands and swiping the tears away with his thumbs. "Nobody is. None of us were ready when it was our turn, even Lara I bet wasn't prepared for her first." Lara scoffed across the room, folding what suspiciously appeared to be a pair of men's undershorts. "Heavens, no, I was stubborn and I prepared in every possible way that I could, but all the books and wisdom and stubbornness in the world won't prepare you enough." "That's not very helpful," Adriana said. "No," Lara agreed, lowering her arms for a moment and looking her dead in the eyes. "But it doesn't matter, because when you hold your first baby for the very first time, it makes every single bit of pain and worry and fear all the more with it." Adriana still felt afraid, but she nodded all the same. That was the best hope she could have going forward. Lara resumed her folding with an approving nod and Hiccup straightened, finally realizing. "Lara, can you?" he faltered when the woman's eyes darted up sharply. "Perhaps not, fold those." The Larson matron rolled her eyes and clucked her tongue. "Honestly, Hiccup, you've fought dragons and all manners of filthy human beings tooth and nail since you were 15 years old, and yet you shy away from a woman folding your skivvies. Get a hold of yourself, man." Hiccup's face slowly flushed in embarrassment as Adriana, her mom, Mara, and even Lara clucked with laughter. Adriana's giggles rose to full-out cackles when he scowled down at her. You. Adriana couldn't breathe. Despite the echoes of pain ravaging her insides, she quickly felt tears of mirth rising in her eyes. "You're so awkward." Astrid, Hiccup said stiffly. The green of his eyes was quite the contrast with the redness of his face. "Why is Lara Larson folding our clothes?" "Because I happened to mention I hate folding and she volunteered." Astrid shrugged in a no-nonsense sort of way. "It seemed like a simple solution, and next time she needs firewood chopped, I'm coming over." "Doesn't she have sons for that?" Astrid drew herself up taller. "I have a son and he doesn't chop the wood." "I do." "Well, maybe he should." Adriana sighed and pulled him into a walk around the kitchen table. "Let's not launch into semantics about the roles between men and women, please. Hey, this all got started because Lara's folding mine and Finn's skivvies." "Yes, Chief," Lara drawled. "We all wear them. We all have butts. What's the big deal?" Adriana snorted into another round of giggles when her father sputtered. "This has to be the weirdest argument we have ever had." Mara was instantly at her side as she doubled over, clutching her belly. "All right, I think gravity has done its work for now. Let's get upstairs and check your progress." "Aha!" Adriana said, following her toward the stairs. Astrid took Hiccup's spot, much to his dismay, but Adriana didn't spare anyone another glance as they took her upstairs. It was slow, painful work and she gritted her teeth the entire time, but she sighed happily when she finally sat back down on the bed upstairs. Or at least, she was happy for about 2 seconds before the pain registered again and she moaned, smothering her face with a pillow. "Oh gods, how long until this is over?" "Soon," Love, Mara said, patting her knee. "Soon." Hiccup paced the entire expanse of the lower house for what felt like hours while the sounds of Adriana's pain and discomfort wafted down the stairs. They hadn't woken Eric up yet, so it couldn't be that far along. Her body was just adjusting more for. With a long sigh, he shoved his hands into his hair. Gods, it felt like it was yesterday that Astrid had been giving birth to their babies and now one of them was doing the same. How did time fly so fast? Perhaps you should sit down, Lara said. Before you either wear a hole through the floor or tear your hair out. Both would be horrible, to be honest. The floors here are nice and you always did have nice hair. Hiccup dropped his hands. Folding my undies and giving me compliments, Lara. I didn't realize we had such an intimate relationship. She clucked with laughter, even as he shook his head and went to the kitchen to make coffee. It wasn't going to be a long night and he planned to be awake for all of it. Luckily, he had plenty of Jatan coffee beans left over from Snoggletalk. Do you drink coffee, Lara? Hiccup asked, trying to gauge how much to make. I do, Lara said, at last finishing the large basket of laundry and folding her hands. But I prefer espresso. Hiccup raised a brow. Espresso? You haven't had it? Oh, well, I will make some. Lara hopped up from her seat and joined him in the kitchen, pulling down bowls and a coffee bean grinder from shelves as if she owned the place. Hiccup hopped onto the countertop as he watched her work, marveling at the fine grounds, the hot water she poured over them minutes later, and the very small glasses she'd found. They were his father's years ago, a matching set of small, fine glasses that were used for strong shots of alcohol, but given that he and Astrid weren't too keen on alcohol consumption, he supposed they'd been shoved into some corner. How Lara had found them was beyond him. Now, Lara said a few minutes later and handing him a steaming glass. It's not like normal coffee. It's stronger, packs more of a punch despite its size. So don't drink it all in one go. Hey, I like a challenge. Lara shrugged. Your funeral. PFT, Hiccup glanced upstairs at the sound of Adriana's whimpers. He clutched his tiny glass of steaming espresso and frowned at the frothy foam gathered at the top. I wish I could help her. Lara pursed her lips and nodded, sipping from her own glass. She's strong. She'll be all right. Eric too. They've both been through so much, but they are stronger because of it. She narrowed her eyes. Because of you, they are stronger. We all played a part. Well, yes, Lara said. But one way or another, all of us gave up on them a little bit. Depending on the day or the time or the circumstance. But you never did. They both turned out quite well considering, and without you, I fear they wouldn't have. The words meant more to him than he could admit. Hiccup didn't want to take all the credit, especially since Astrid also had never lost hope in any of their kids. But he nodded. I hope you're right, he said at last. That she'll be all right, I mean. She's been through so much, and if something goes wrong today. He adjusted his grip on the glass, his palms sweaty. I don't know what I'll do. For either of them if something happens. Lara gave him a flat look. Stop worrying. Everything will be all right, and come tomorrow morning, you'll all be smiling bright and happy, and I'll try my best to avoid saying I told you so. Hiccup huffed a laugh. She was right, of course. How strange was it that after all those years of animosity and arguments, they were now having coffee while his daughter was upstairs close to giving birth. That she had offered to do anything for Astrid, even folding laundry, to give her space and clearance, to not worry about household chores so she could focus on their daughter. Sure, the road had been bumpy. But Hiccup at last understood Lara Larsson. That where she loved and cared, it was deep and true, and no sacrifice was too great, no task too small or menial. She'd do anything, be anywhere, and she'd go down defending those she loved. And when it came to say goodbye, to let go of those she loved, of course, it was unbearably difficult. Thank you, Lara, Hiccup said. She met his gaze with a slight frown, as if she knew that he'd come to a conclusion at last. She never would be a smiling, effervescent person, but she was loyal. Just like Eric. I hope you know that you're always welcome here. Our kids are married. We're family now. Lara sniffed, a cool look of amusement on her face as she raised her espresso to her lips. I would have thought Astrid gave me that status when she allowed me to fold all your clothes, but I'll take the formal speech. The door opened behind them as Hiccup exhaled heavily in mild annoyance. Ignoring Lara's laugh, he pivoted in time to see Finn close the door. Hey kiddo, Hiccup hopped down from the counter and met him across the room. How are you feeling? Fine, tired. Finn said, raising a hand to greet Lara. He didn't elaborate, but he did indeed look tired, both physically and. Hiccup cocked his head. Everything okay with Genevieve? Huh? Finn asked, meeting his eyes. Oh yeah, she's fine, we're good. Why? Hiccup couldn't put his finger on it, but for some reason Finn looked drained emotionally. His skin was blotchy, eyes slightly red. That could be symptoms of his all-nighter and exhaustion from the duel, but he didn't think so. He opted to stay silent though and just observe, however, not with Lara around. Folding skivvies and sharing coffee was one thing, but grilling his son in her presence would not a happy fearless Finn make. Never mind, Hiccup said, slinging an arm around his shoulders and steering him into the kitchen. Are you hungry? Starving? Well, let's see what we can find then. Lara said, bustling to the icebox. And Hiccup, you'd better drink that coffee before it settles and gets cold. Oh yeah, Hiccup said, raising the glass to his lips. Why? Finn frowned. Why is Lara cooking? Just play along. Hiccup said before knocking back the entire glass of espresso. His eyes bugged and he swallowed hastily at the highly concentrated coffee, squeezing his eyes shut and taking a sharp breath. Whoa. Are you okay? Finn asked, sounding quite concerned. Phew. Hiccup opened his eyes and shook his head to clear it. He inspected the empty glass with surprise. She wasn't kidding. Espresso is strong stuff. Finn blinked. Jen mentioned espresso once. Apparently Thuggery goes nuts on the stuff. Like, he doesn't stop talking kind of nuts. I hope. Lara emerged from the icebox holding biscuits, bacon and eggs. She paused at the counter, frowning at Hiccup and the empty glass. You drank it all at once, didn't you? Yeah, I forgot and it was getting cold, and you weren't kidding, it's really strong. I wasn't expecting it to be that highly concentrated. Oh Lara, what have you done? Finn sighed, idly rubbing his neck. What are you talking about? Hiccup asked. I feel amazing. Yes, your pupils are dilated, Lara said dryly before setting the items on the counter. Ever had eggs Benedict? No, Hiccup said, taking the stool beside his son and watching her pull more bowls onto the counter. What are eggs Benedict? Yes, we ate. Finn froze, mid-sentence as if remembering something. Oh no, never mind. I was thinking of something else. He awkwardly avoided eye contact, which Hiccup thought strange, but who was he to question? Thoughts seemed to be spinning through Hiccup's mind faster than he could process. He watched as Lara began putting a strange egg and bacon and biscuit dish together but didn't seem to realize that he was drumming his fingers on the countertop in time with the bobbing of his prosthetic on the floor until Finn slowly looked over his shoulder with an increasingly murderous look in his eye. Note to self, Lara said. If we want Hiccup to do his Cliff impersonation, just give him espresso. Please do not invoke the name of that person, Finn said. He'll come running and then we'll really be in trouble. I doubt Anna would like that very much. How is she, by the way? Coming along nicely, a voice said, and Hiccup turned to see a beautiful angel stalking down the stairs. Astrid flipped her braid over her shoulder and stalked to the counter. She's dilated 4 centimeters. We'll probably wake up Eric relatively soon. Once we get past 4, things start to move quicker. Finn seemed to quail under the words, even as Lara nodded. Hiccup, on the other hand, stared in wonder at his wife and smiled broadly when she threw an arm around his shoulders. How was the last meeting? Astrid asked. Hiccup took a deep breath. Well, initially it started with many arguments about the duel because people thought it was unfair that Brandine cheated twice in the duel, which I agreed with, but honestly, what can anyone do because it is what it is, and cheating or no, Brandine won by first blood, so there's no point in going back and forth over it. And then we started discussing. Whoa, Hiccup. Astrid said, throwing up her hands with a look of concern. Slow down, what's wrong with you? Are you that stressed? More like under the influence, Finn scoffed. I know what too much booze looks like with your father, Finn, and if he was drunk, he'd be trying to schmooze me and probably burst into tears the moment I told him I'm already married. Now what did you two give him? Espresso. Astrid's blue eyes narrowed dangerously. More coffee. It's highly concentrated, Astrid. Hiccup said, unfazed by the fact they were talking about him like he wasn't there. He felt great. It's from darker coffee beans ground into an almost fine powder and with hot water, Then it's brewed into a really smooth, hot drink that's absolutely fantabulous. Astrid sighed. Next he'll be saying he can see sounds and hear colors, Finn snickered. Lara cleared her throat to cover up a laugh, but the rise of color to her cheeks was a dead giveaway. This isn't funny, Astrid remarked. Your sister doesn't feel well. Hey, I don't feel well either, Finn whined, pointing at his neck. Oh, silence, you impudent male, and eat your eggs, Benedict, Lara said, sliding a plate full of food toward him. Until you have yourself a womb and can birth children yourself. Finn said loudly, standing and grabbing his plate and fork. I'm going to eat my eggs, Benedict, over there. That would be wise, Lara said. She turned to Astrid and added, don't worry. It won't last long. Good, Astrid said, running a hand through Hiccup's hair and sending a tingle down his spine. Because we need Dad to focus. Oh, I am focused. I am so focused, my eyes are going crossed. I think I might just sleep in the barn tonight. Finn, shut up and eat your eggs. Hours had to have passed. Adriana wasn't really sure. The only thing she could really do anymore was lay on her left side and count the minutes between each pain that clutched her body. Mara checked her progress more and more often as time went on, humming or making light comments of approval. She kept Astrid informed, who kept everyone downstairs informed, but Adriana paid little attention to these things. She just wanted it to be done and over with. She wanted to ask if they knew what time it was, but she was afraid if she asked they would say it had only been an hour. That she still had all night to go. The thought was enough to nearly undo her, but she stubbornly refused to give in. Even though she longed for it to be finished, she knew it wasn't time yet. She had a feeling that she'd know when it was time. Still, as the pain increased and the time between them shortened, it became increasingly more difficult to keep the moans of pain locked up inside. Finally, after what felt like eons, she asked Mara what time it was. Judging by the moon, Mara said tiredly from her seat by the window. It has to be nearing 3 in the morning. Adriana's eyes flew open. What? Mara simply nodded. Rolling halfway onto her back, Adriana pressed a palm to her forehead. We've been in here for almost 12 hours. That's completely normal. Don't stop, Mara. I don't want to hear another word about how this God's freaking experience is completely normal. Adriana roared suddenly, heat rising to her face. She wanted to be done, she wanted this to be over. Astrid marched into the room just as Adriana covered her face, trying to fight the tears as another wave of pain overcame her. Adri, you just have to stay calm. It will all be over soon. I don't want it to be over soon, I want it over now. Do you want me to get Eric? The question was gentle and calm, taking her by surprise. Adriana lowered her hands and nodded, hating the sniffling and the tears. Even now she had to cry about it like a big baby. Sure, don't cry, Astrid said, wiping her face. I'll go get him, just hold on. She was gone in moments. Adriana bit down on her emotion, refusing to give it another inch. I'm sorry, Mara. Mara laughed and gently patted her knee. Oh, don't you worry, love. You're not the first to yell at me in such circumstances. Adriana's laugh turned into a blubbering wet mess when Eric appeared, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. Even though she'd really been fine without him and the sleep was good for him since he appeared well rested than before, she tried not to burst into tears at the sight of him. He kneeled down at her side as Mara excused herself, stating she needed more tea. She and Astrid left them alone as Eric surveyed her condition. Hey, Eric said, his voice a little groggy. You okay? Unable to form the words, Adriana shook her head. She gripped his hand when he moved to push stray hairs out of her eyes, even as tears replaced them. I'm not ready, she said. I thought I was ready and I'm not, I don't want to do this. Hey, Eric slid an arm around her shoulder. You're going to be okay. He smoothed the hair back from her brow in slow, soothing movements that helped her relax despite her emotions. We're going to get through this, I promise. It hurts. I know, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Rest now. He kissed her forehead and pulled away. Adriana's eyes slipped closed. She heard the sound of splashing water and then a cool towel rested on her forehead. She hummed in surprise and relaxed even as he continued brushing her hair back and dabbing her forehead. A mommy, Annie, he whispered. You get to be a mommy today. She cracked her eyes open to see his warm smile and felt one tug at her own lips. That sounds nice. She slid a hand up his wrist, too tired to do anything else. She snuggled back into her pillow and that thought became a mantra that circled her mind in the coming hours. Finn didn't know what time he'd fallen asleep on the couch, but he awoke to a multitude of sounds. Excited voices, movement, crashing footsteps on the stairs, even the front door opened once. He sat up on his elbows and shook off the exhaustion, trying to piece together what was going on, why he was on the couch, and why his neck hurt so much. Then a girl's sharp cry echoed down the stairs. Adriana. He rolled to his feet, suddenly wide awake. His dad stood at the foot of the stairs, clenching and unclenching his fists at his sides, looking for all the world like he was about to march up there. Dad. Hiccup turned around, face grim. He swallowed. It's time. Finn felt a lurch of terror in his stomach. Like, right now? Yes. Hiccup looked back up the stairs as she cried out again. She's almost ready, your mom just told me. Finn glanced out the nearest window. The sky was pale in color, darkness fading by the minute. Dawn. That meant she'd been in labor for around 12 hours. Gods, women were by far the stronger gender. He'd never make fun of a girl again. So. He swallowed when his dad met his eyes. Now what? Hiccup turned away, hands in his hair. Now we wait. Eric had lost track of time hours ago. Not that he'd ever thought too hard about childbirth in his young 19 years of life, aside from the last year, of course, but he had no idea what sort of experience it would be. Both terrifying, and thrilling. Of course, sitting beside Adriana on the bed, holding her hand while she fought through the pain was more terrifying than anything. But when Mara and Astrid advised him to lean forward to see what was happening, at first he balked. But Mara gave him an understanding smile and waved him forward again. Gulping, he obeyed, and for as long as he lived, he'd never forget what he saw next. Is that the baby's head? Mara said proudly. Yes. Adriana let out a wail. No, 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 make it stop. Baby, there's no stopping it now. Eric said, holding her hand tight. His heart pounded in his chest so hard he thought it would burst. Anna, it has to be now. Mara said in a firm voice. Deep breath. Tear tracks stained Adriana's face as she shook her head. I can't. Yes you can, Annie, yes you can. Deep breath, Adri. Somehow, perhaps by some instinct overthrowing her fear, Adriana obeyed and she bore down. Yes sweetheart, push, 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 Mara said. Eric watched as Adriana's face turned a bright shade of red before she exhaled and slumped against the pillows, against him. Good girl. Mara. Just breathe, Anna. Mara patted her knee. Take a second and breathe. That's good, you're doing great. Adriana took a few deep breaths and Eric wiped her face with a cloth. Her face went from bright red back to pink. Her brow was furrowed and her hand tight around his. It was almost over and she was eager to finish it. All right, Anna, on the next contraction, give me a big push, Mara said. Deep breath and push, there you go, good girl. Eric's mind was buzzing, watching Adriana somehow move past the pain, ignore her fear even though he could still see it in her eyes, but he saw something else in those green eyes he loved so fiercely. Determination. Almost there, Mara said in an excited voice, and then. A small, tiny wail rose up in the cacophony of noise. Adriana slumped into the pillows again, panting hard, tears slipping down her face, even as Mara and Astrid cheered and chattered excitedly. Eric couldn't form any thoughts as they gathered up a beautiful little baby in a bundle of cloths, rubbing and cleaning. All he could see was flashes of pink skin and then another squeal of a cry that was a song to his blood. Life. A new life. He blinked and realized his face was wet. Oh my God, Eric said, covering his mouth. Annie. Annie, look. Adriana looked exhausted, her chest still heaving, but she managed to raise her head. Her tired expression cleared as she saw them cleaning her baby. What is it? Mara shuffled to their side and gently set the baby, bundled clothes and all, on Adriana's chest. Adriana gasped, holding the squealing baby close. "Congratulations," Mara said, tears brightening her eyes. "You have a son." Staring down at the little baby boy whimpering on Adriana's chest, seeing her eyes clear and fill with such wonder and joy, Eric thought his heart would burst. He didn't know what to do with himself, so he kissed Adriana's temple. Remembering him, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Eric, it's a boy." Laughing, Eric nodded. "I know." A hand rested on his shoulder and he looked up to see Astrid's tear-stained face. He rose and hugged her tightly. "Mom, it's a boy. I can't believe it." "Congratulations," Astrid said in his ear before kissing his cheek. "We should get him properly cleaned up and dressed." Adriana didn't seem too inclined to part with him so soon but nodded. "Be quick. Please." "Of course." Astrid scooped up the baby, who wailed. "Oh, I know, I know." Mara patted Adriana's knee, as if in reminder. "While she does that, we have other things to attend to." Like what Adriana began, then flopped back in annoyance. "Oh yeah." Eric frowned in confusion. "What's this? You may not like this part. I suggest going to see your son." Mara didn't need to tell him twice. He didn't want to watch while she cleaned Adriana up from the birthing process. But that didn't stop him from leaning down and kissing Adriana. She pulled away first, looking positively exhausted, but happy. "Go see him." Eric nodded and walked to where Astrid was wrapping their son up in a blanket, wearing a comfy little cloth outfit to keep him warm. Astrid gazed down at him with bright eyes filled with such happiness. He touched her shoulder. "Congratulations to you too, Grandma." Astrid tried to scoff but it came out as a breathy laugh. "Thanks." She too seemed like she didn't want to give up the little baby so soon, but she quickly relented, probably knowing that there would be plenty of time for everyone to have a turn later. Eric would have told her to take her time, but as if sensing the words, she firmly set the baby into his arms. Time slowed. He was small, perhaps 7 or 8 pounds. Though his skin was a bright pink, his little eyes squeezed tightly shut, Eric quickly recognized a few haddock trays, the nose, the shape of the eyes. Time would only tell what other characteristics he'd have. With shaking fingers, Eric brushed a thumb down a tiny little cheek. "Happy birthday, kiddo." He could have stood there and looked at him all day, but a near silent sniff pulled him out of his wonder, his thoughts. He didn't have to look at Adriana to know she wanted him. Yet as he turned, he caught sight of the white scars running down his exposed forearm. At some point he'd pushed his shirt sleeves up, not even thinking about the scars being visible, but now, in a strange moment, he remembered how bad things used to be. After losing his father and then his sister, he'd been so depressed. So lonely. He'd thought that he'd never be happy again, that life couldn't possibly get better after the things that had happened. Of course, in time he'd come to know that it would get better. He'd made friends, fixed his relationship with most of his family, and gotten to marry the love of his life. But this was a whole new level of beginnings. This, right here in his arms, was what made all of it worth it. "Everything did get better," he said hoarsely. He looked up at Adriana, Astrid and Mara, these women who'd done so much for him in the terribly bumpy road he'd traveled. Their tear-streaked faces burned with such love and pride. He vowed to be worthy of it. And looking down at the little bundle in his arms, his son, he felt such a deep, unending love grow in his chest, filling his limbs and burning in his heart. If only this little one knew just how much he was loved and how many people would go to the mat to protect him. As he bent and carefully handed him to Adriana, Eric resolved in his heart and soul that he would only be the first to do so when the time came. To protect this, his little, beautiful family, he would do anything. No matter what. "My son. My son." The words were running through Adriana's head so rapidly, it was enough to give herself a headache. She knew it was partially a result of sleep deprivation that she felt so out of sorts, that her vision occasionally went out of focus and her muscles felt like lead. She didn't care. Not about the soreness radiating through her lower body, not about the slight headache her fatigue was already giving her, not about her heart still thumping uncomfortably as it was still slowing back to normal. None of that mattered. Her son was here. Ever since she was a little girl, she'd wanted to be a mother. She'd loved babies and gotten excited whenever she saw them. She still remembered the thrill of holding one all by herself for the first time. She was 7 and it was one of the Ingerman children. Those tiny fingers and toes, that soft skin, all of it had fascinated her and created a deep and overwhelming longing to one day have one of her own. From the moment she realized she was pregnant, even though she was terrified and devastated that it had happened, she knew in her heart of hearts that this baby was a gift, a blessing. She had loved him more and more with each passing day for 10 months. But to see him, to hear him cry for the first time, she felt like her heart would burst. Tears splashed down her face and she was laughing and crying and gods knew what else anymore. Her emotions were so jumbled, she wouldn't have been able to properly write it even with all the poetic language in the world. And now that she was finally clean, now that Eric was carrying him to her, she suddenly felt like she couldn't wait another second. Of course, her wonderful blessing of a husband knew this because the baby was in her arms a second later. It felt like her arms were made to hold him. Like her fingers were made to stroke his cheek, her lips were made to kiss his little forehead. Gods, he was so soft. She kissed his forehead again and felt his little hand brush against her cheek. Hey, she breathed, her voice still weak. What took you so long? She heard Eric chuckle as he slipped into bed next to her and put his arm around her shoulders. The newborn stirred when she tried to slip his arm back in his blankets, finally opening his eyes to look at her. I love you, she whispered to him. She turned to her husband. Both of you. Me too, Eric said in a shaking voice, wiping his eyes on his sleeve. The smirk was across Adriana's face almost of its own accord. Well, a bit of self-love is a good thing, but... Ha ha. Eric squeezed her shoulder. Now I know you're doing better. I am. Adriana turned back to her son and her smirk melted into a genuine smile. Thanks for giving me a reason to keep fighting, little guy. The baby opened his mouth in a wide yawn. Adriana felt another rush of joy, of love, for her son. He looked so comfortable in her arms, so peaceful and calm. In some ways, they had been a team for such a long time. She had taken care of him and, in turn, he had given her hope again after such a horrific experience. It felt strange to think of it like this, because she knew her baby didn't fully understand what his presence had done for her, but she felt like he had been there for her since that day, a constant in such an uncertain time. Carrying him had given her hope, one bright beacon in her dark thoughts. She didn't regret it. She couldn't regret it. The worst moment in her life had transformed into such bliss that she felt like she would be willing to go through it all over again, from beginning to end, if it meant having him. She would rather endure that pain to live in a world where he was her baby, her son, than a world without him in which she had never once suffered. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew since she was little that raising kids was difficult and sometimes painful. She'd wondered why her parents had stuck with her, had loved her so much despite the heartache she'd put them through, and now it made perfect sense. She could never stop loving this baby, never give up on him, no matter what he put her through. She felt Eric brush her hair back and kiss her temple. How are you feeling? She leaned into him. Sore. Glad this is over. Yeah, Eric said, his smile audible. We did it. Adriana laughed weakly. We sure did. The entire upstairs had gotten very quiet. Too quiet. It was enough to fray his nerves. Hiccup didn't hold his pacing as the excitement of the baby's birth ebbed away. His heart had skipped a beat when he'd heard that first high cry, a rush of joy filling his chest. But he didn't allow himself to celebrate. Not yet. For it had become very quiet upstairs. No more baby cries, no more excited chatter, no sounds of his baby girl. Finn sat in a chair across from Mara looking positively white. Any exhaustion had cleared from his face in lieu of the birth, but Hiccup couldn't quite place if he was white with terror for his sister or the fact that their little family had just grown. Lara had set down her knitting and was patiently waiting. He didn't know how she could be so calm. Then it occurred to him that she'd had 5 children. Of course she was calm. He was just about to voice this thought when footsteps thudded on the stairs. He whipped around to see Astrid descending, her blue eyes bright. Hiccup met her at the foot of the stairs. Addie. Is she? She's fine, Astrid said, grinning ear to ear. Despite the messiness of her braid due to being up all night, her skin was flushed with happiness. "She's perfectly fine, she did so well." Hiccup, you should have seen it. A wave of relief hit him so hard his knees almost buckled. He exhaled heavily, fighting the wave of emotion. "And the baby?" Astrid nodded. "Healthy?" "Well?" Lara demanded. "What is it?" His wife's eyes darted to Lara and Finn sitting at the table, her eyes lingering for a moment on her son. "It's a boy." Hiccup blinked at her, even as Finn exhaled heavily as if he'd been holding his breath. Lara clapped her hands and nodded, as if satisfied with the answer. A boy. It was a boy. A strong sense of joy filled him. He didn't know when it started, but next he was laughing and hugging Astrid tighter than he ever had before. They had a grandson. Astrid kissed his cheek as she pulled away. "Grandpa." Hiccup elbowed her as she walked past to check on Finn, who looked a bit dazed. "Grandma. You all right?" Astrid asked. "Yeah," Finn said, blinking out of his reverie. "I mean, of course it's a boy. I knew it all along." "Aha," Astrid said, stooping to kiss his cheek. "Uncle Finn." A small smile pulled at his face, but he said nothing else as she returned to Hiccup's side and took his hand. "Adri's all cleaned up," she said. "She said you can come upstairs anytime." Hiccup felt a flash of nerves but didn't give them an inch. He followed her up the stairs and into their room, which looked much different than it usually did by comparison. Most of the furniture had been moved to one side to make extra room on both sides of the bed, upon which was his precious Adriana. She looked exhausted, her blonde hair mostly falling out of the bun atop her head. Her eyes were on the little squirming bundle in her arms, her green eyes full of such wonder and joy. Eric sat in a chair beside the bed, gently pushing a piece of the blanket away from the baby's face. He looked up when they arrived and nearly jumped out of his chair, ecstatic in a way that Hiccup had almost never seen before. "Hiccup." Eric gripped him in a tight hug before he could make it 3 steps into the room. He pulled away quickly, shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't believe it." Hiccup squeezed his shoulder. He didn't have the words when Adriana met his eyes, her face infused with happiness. His baby girl, who'd been through so much and seen so much darkness in the world, looked so happy and peaceful at last, just as he knew she would when this moment finally came at last. His heart burned with such pride, it was all he could do to not fall to his knees right there and weep. "Daddy, don't look like that," Adriana chided, reaching out to take his hand. "Come here." Hiccup obeyed but ignored her hand in favor of wrapping his arms around her and squeezing tight. Adriana's free arm came around his neck. He felt the collar of his shirt grow wet from where her face was pressed even as tears slipped down his own face. Even after everything that had happened, after all the sleepless nights, the blood and sweat and tears, every ounce of stress, he'd do it all over again for the young woman in his arms, and the baby lying in hers. He was so thankful that he got to have this moment with her and that together they'd survived so much. His Addy. "Thank you," Adriana whispered, pulling back and wiping the tears off his face. "If it wasn't for you." "Sure, no." Hiccup shook his head. "We made it together. All of us." He glanced up at Astrid, her arm wrapped around Eric's shoulders. He gave Mara a grateful nod as she excused herself, patting him on the shoulder on the way out to give them a moment. Hiccup turned his attention back to Adriana and the little bundle wrapped in her arms. She shifted so he could see better. Instantly he saw the haddock nose in the round little face. He squirmed in the blankets, squeaking in protest at the bonds holding his little arms back. "Stubborn already," Hiccup said, earning a grin from Adriana. He peeled back a layer of the blanket that shadowed the baby's eyes and marveled at the softness of newborn baby skin and the peach fuzz hair. "No telling what hair color yet, I'm afraid." Adriana shrugged. "Or eye color it seems." His eyes were open earlier but they just looked blue. "Mom said that can change though." She gave him a slightly nervous look. "Do you want to hold him? You don't have to give him up so soon." "Trust me," Adriana said, sitting up slightly. "I've been carrying him for 9, almost 10 months and there is plenty more to come. Everyone is allowed to have a turn." She cradled her arms around him and minding his head, pressed him into Hiccup's arms so flawlessly, it seemed like she'd already done it 100 times. But any thoughts on the matter disappeared when he held his grandson for the first time. A little pink tongue darted out as he squirmed, as if cold from the sudden transfer. Hiccup sat back on his heels and snuggled him close, marveling at how tiny but strong he was. A little fist finally shoved out of the blanket, waving around before grabbing onto Hiccup's finger. Hiccup pecked the tiny little fingers. "Nice to meet you, little one," he squeaked in earnest, his face contorting with discomfort. "Oh, now is that any way to greet your Poppy?" Adriana asked. "Poppy?" Hiccup asked, surprise. "That's what you're calling me?" Adriana shrugged. "That's what we called your dad. Poppy. It seems fitting." "I for one think it's adorable," Eric agreed. "Oh, be quiet, you sap." Eric shrugged, not minding the term one bit. Indeed, Hiccup wondered if that dimpled smile would ever fade after today. Knowing his own pride after his kids had been born, he doubted it. Adriana nodded toward the door. "You should take him downstairs." "Are you sure?" Hiccup asked. "If he's getting fussy." "He hasn't started crying yet," Adriana said. "I want him to meet Finn and Lara." Nodding, Hiccup carefully stood, the baby snuggled warmly in the blankets. He shook out his left leg, feeling a rush of tingles from where the blood circulation had cut off. Then, smiling at Adriana, he turned and left the room to introduce the newest member of the family to the others. The day that Finn had discovered his sister was pregnant, he'd been beside himself with anger and rage. In the months that followed, he'd gone through a series of emotions from anger to confusion to sadness to neutrality, and only in the last few weeks did he feel a strong sense of nervousness. Honestly, the larger she'd gotten and the closer her due date came, the more terrified he got. What was he supposed to do with a baby in the family anyway? What was his role? He was just the uncle, which wasn't nothing, but did it carry the same level of importance as a parent or grandparent? He'd never had an uncle, so he wasn't sure. Kids had always been his sister's line of business, not his. Heck, he'd never even talked to a kid younger than 10 years old. Now he felt a bit lost, like a rudderless ship. He supposed he was being a bit dramatic and tried to steer his thoughts to something more positive, but he couldn't help it. Genevieve would have said he was afraid. And she'd be right. This fact was only proven when he heard the gentle step thunk of his dad's prosthetic on the stairs. Finn's heart skipped a beat when his eyes landed on what he carried. "Oh, it's about time," Lara said, hopping out of her chair and rushing forward. She peered into the little bundle with a coo. "Why, hello there. And good, Eric, I was wondering when you'd remember that I existed." Eric reached the bottom of the stairs and laughed. He embraced his mom, apologizing and launching into the story. Finn stood from his chair, tuning out the excited chatter from the Larsons. The little bundle in his dad's arms squirmed, a small squeak sounding over the noise. Astrid laughed. "Finn, stop sizing up your nephew." He whipped his gaze to his mom. "I'm not sizing him up." "You're scowling." "I'm not scowling, I'm processing." "Yes, you scowl when you process." "Astrid, leave him alone," Hiccup said quietly, looking at him with a strangely somber look. He took a few steps forward. Finn forced himself to stay put, to not back away. To keep them from shaking, he shoved his hands into his pockets, feeling exceptionally awkward when his dad stopped at his side and said, "Say hello to your nephew." Finn stared down into the pink, pudgy little face ensconced in the blanket. A tiny arm had forced its way out as he tried to cram his fist into his mouth, sounding far too irritated for only being born less than an hour ago. "About time you showed up, kid," Finn said, raising a brow. "You're late." Snorts of laughter sounded around the room and he could have sworn he heard an indignant sigh from upstairs, as if Adriana was straining to hear every word. "You meet your nephew for the first time," Eric said. "And the first thing you tell him is you're late." Finn shrugged. "What can I say? I value punctuality." Astrid rolled her eyes, but Finn didn't care. He wasn't being serious. In fact, making the stupid jokes actually eased some of the tension from his body. He didn't know why he'd gotten himself so worked up before, it was just a little baby. Maybe he should chill out. Hiccup watched him closely, as if reading his thoughts. Finn met his gaze head-on, unwilling to be the one to blink first. He didn't know why, but if anyone was doing the sizing up, it was his dad. He could handle this. Sure, it had been a long road, but they'd handled everything else that had been thrown at him. He could handle his sister's newborn baby. Even if he still scared him a little bit. A small, knowing smile tugged up one half of Hiccup's face. Like he recognized and understood that fear. Finn cleared his throat and turned to Eric. "How's Anna?" "Good," Eric said. "Tired, but good. I'll spare you the details, but when people say it's an amazing experience, they aren't kidding." "I'll take your word for it," Finn said, finally removing his hands from his pockets to give his brother-in-law a hug. Eric embraced him and slapped him on the back, looking positively elated. It was strange just how much had changed in the last year, and now here was one of his bestest brothers, married and a dad. Finn pulled back and sighed. "Dude, I don't think I've seen you smile that big since." He frowned at his dad as he stepped closer. "What are you doing? Don't you want to hold your nephew?" Hiccup asked, a slight teasing edge to his voice. Finn's heart skipped a beat, all thoughts freezing in his head. What?" Eric snorted but held his tongue, even as Hiccup adjusted his grip on the tiny bundle. "I heard what you said," Finn said, taking a step back. I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" Astrid asked, smirking right alongside Lara in the kitchen. "Because I I don't want to." He finished lamely. "Aha!" Hiccup smiled, stepping closer still. "Hold out your arms." "Dad, I've never," Finn huffed, hating the blush that rose to his face. "I've never held a baby before." "I know," Hiccup said, gently lifting the baby up. "And the first one you ever hold is going to be your nephew." Finn clenched and unclenched his hands as the baby came closer, still sucking on his fist. "But what if I drop him?" "You won't," Hiccup said. "If you can volunteer to fight in a duel to protect your nephew and his mother's life, then you can hold him for the first time too." Astrid appeared at his elbow, moving his arms to a better position as his dad carefully handed over the baby, who squeaked and squirmed in the blankets again. "It's okay to be afraid," she said softly. "Just don't let fear hold you back." And just like that, his parents let go, and Finn was holding a baby. He stared down at him, afraid to move for fear of disturbing the peace. "Don't forget to breathe," Hiccup said, his voice laced with amusement. Finn huffed a laugh. "Right. Breathing is good." His hands felt too big to be holding such a tiny little thing. He could easily hold him in one arm, he was so small and lightweight. He didn't dare risk it, not when he was holding something so precious. The word clanged through him. This was his sister's baby. His sister's son. His nephew. For so long the idea had been so foreign and strange. He couldn't comprehend it. He hadn't known what to expect and hadn't allowed himself to think too much about it, if only because he had no experience with children. He liked having a purpose and knowing where he stood, what his role was, and he never realized what that would look like. What it could look like. And now, he realized that this tiny human was his flesh and blood. He was a part of the family now. And he wasn't just Adriana and Eric's son, or his parents' grandson, he was Finn's nephew. Only in recent months had the idea started to sound nice, but only in jesting. He'd never fully realized what an important role he would play in this child's life. He'd already played an important role in his short life. Just yesterday he'd gone down fighting to protect Adriana and this little baby. His nephew. For so long the baby had just been a concept. But not anymore. Now he was alive and breathing and fragile and infinitely precious. And Finn knew he'd walk onto every battlefield necessary to protect him, no matter how big or small. "What do you think?" Astrid asked quietly from his elbow. Finn shifted slightly, fingers curving around the warm sleeping body. "He's so tiny." "He won't be forever," Hiccup said. "Just blink a few times and..." "Don't," Eric pointed. "Let me enjoy this before you burst my bubble." They chuckled and Finn turned to Lara. "Do you want a turn?" Lara shook her head. "That's all right, dear. I'll get a turn later. He looks quite comfy." "Doesn't he though?" Astrid asked, elbowing him. Who knew you'd be so good at holding babies? Oh sure, how hard is it to guard a potato? Eric choked, even as the others gasped in dismay. My son is not a potato. Excuse me, Finn said, carefully sliding into the nearest chair. My nephew is sleeping and it would be a real shame if he were to wake up because you couldn't control yourself. What? You heard me, Finn said, snuggling his nephew closer. He needs his beauty sleep if he's going to look like me someday. Astrid sighed. We've created a monster. We just needed to clear some hurdles, that's all. Hiccup said. But I would suggest not calling him a potato in front of Addy. Finn shrugged again. Hey, he's my nephew. At that moment, the baby stirred awake, squirming in his arms. Finn was very glad he was sitting down and found himself gritting his teeth when the little guy's face scrunched up angrily. His little voice rose up in a strange, panting keen until a long wail echoed through the room. I'm sorry, I take it back. Finn whispered. You don't really look like a potato. Much to his relief, Eric took the baby from his arms. Hey now, it's okay. It was strange to see Eric holding the baby after so long talking about it, but Finn had to admit, he was a natural. Eric looked to the others, looking a bit nervous. I think I'll take him back upstairs. He's probably getting hungry, Astrid said. We've been down here for a while anyway. I'm sure Adri misses him already. They watched him walk to the stairs, the baby crying in his arms before Finn realized something. Hey. What's his name? You didn't tell us. Turning, Eric gave them a sly smile and proceeded up the stairs. Oh well, that's just, Finn huffed, crossing his arms. The kid is finally born and they still won't tell us the name. Patience is a virtue, kiddo. Hiccup patted his shoulder. We didn't tell everyone your names until the naming ceremony. He groaned. Gods, if he had to wait until after the convocation to know the name, if he had to just call him the baby for one more week, he'd burst. I'm proud of you, Finn. His dad said, a somber edge to his voice. Finn looked up, but his dad's eyes were on the stairs toward the room above. I was mad at you yesterday and I wish we'd been honest with each other about everything. I should have told you my plans, too. He looked down, green eyes meeting blue. And even though you didn't win, I'm proud of you for doing whatever it took to protect your sister and her family. Finn shrugged. I learned bravery from the best. Hiccup beamed and squeezed his shoulder. Get some rest though. We've got another long day ahead of us, though you don't have to go to the morning meeting. Are you kidding? I'm going. After yesterday, I have to. Well, if you want to. Finn blinked in surprise that his dad didn't argue. He figured he'd make him stay home and rest, since he'd pulled almost 2 all-nighters now and was still injured. But he'd go to the meeting. Brandine would be there and he'd find out about the baby soon enough, if he hadn't yet already. And they needed to be ready when he made his move. Hiccup selected a spot at the couch and made to sit down, looking exhausted when Eric appeared at the top of the stairs. Hey, Annie wants everyone to come upstairs for a minute. Finn's brows flicked up in surprise, but he said nothing as his parents and Lara aimed for the stairs, looking confused as well. He followed them, wincing at the pain in his neck that flared dully. Maybe he shouldn't hold the baby again for a while, not until he was properly healed. He should probably change the bandages again. The thoughts disappeared when he walked into his parents' room. Adriana looked a bit disheveled and tired, but her green eyes were bright as they beheld her family and her son resting in her arms. Finn took up a spot in front of the large mirror and waited as the others took up a seat. Eric took a seat beside her and gave her a short nod. So, we've come to a decision, Adriana said, her voice a bit hoarse. We were going to wait to tell you until tomorrow, but, well, Eric mentioned Finn was whining, so I decided we should tell you anyway. The name. Yes. Finn smirked. Whining does pay off. No, it doesn't. Adriana said, then cleared her throat. We had a hard time picking, there were so many names for boys and girls that we liked. We had many ideas and we decided, just in case, to have a few names picked out just in case we did have twins or something outrageous. They laughed and she rolled her eyes. I'm so glad that didn't happen. But on a more serious note. She locked eyes with Hiccup and Astrid. Whatever we chose, we wanted it to be something special. While there were a handful that we liked, there was only one name that felt right. Adriana glanced at Eric, who nodded encouragingly. She even met Finn's eyes, much to his surprise, before looking back at their parents. So, in honor of the baby brother we never had a chance to meet, we want to name him Darin. Darin Eric Larsson. Finn's heart stopped, then started again. He looked to his parents to gauge their reactions and was even more surprised to see tears in both of their eyes. Audrey Astrid said, closing her eyes and failing miserably to stop the tears from falling down her face. You don't have to. I want to, Adriana said. We want to. We talked about it for months. I know we never got to meet him. Her voice wobbled. But he was a part of our family too. And the more I thought about it and the more we talked about, it just felt right. But I want your honest opinion, too. If it's too painful. Fighting tears of his own, Hiccup released Astrid's hand and closed the distance between them. He bent down and kissed Adriana's forehead firmly, cupping her chin in his hand. Addie, it's your baby, and we'd be honored if you wanted to use Darin. Adriana beamed and kissed his cheek. As if she'd been afraid they wouldn't like it or that they'd be upset. It's a good name, Finn said. I really like it. Do you really? Adriana asked. I do, Finn nodded. But I'm curious, why Eric for the middle name? Honestly, I argued about that for a while. Eric said a bit sheepishly. But she wanted it. For the man who sacrificed so much for me and our son, Adriana said, squeezing his hand and kissing the back of his palm. It was a small token to show my gratitude. And we're going to raise our son to be just like all these brilliant men I know and love. She beamed at Eric, Hiccup, and then, to his surprise, to Finn. Yes, don't look so surprised, even you, Finnegan. Does this mean your second-born will be named after me? Adriana scoffed, even as the others laughed. Not likely. I had to try. Sure. Adriana gazed down at her son with a bright-eyed look of happiness and pride. Yes, Finn realized, all those months ago, his dad had been right. There really was healing and joy and happiness here. This was exactly how it was all meant to be. Darin Eric Larsson, Hiccup murmured, running a finger down a soft, tiny cheek. A sunrise for a new day. Chapter 46, Unity Day. Chapter text. Adriana woke slowly with a fuzzy, compressed sensation of cotton in her brain. Warm rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, sending specks of dust dancing and sparkling through the air. Adriana stretched slowly, acknowledging the various aches and pains of her body. Eric was fast asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even. And in her arms, still bundled and looking rather cozy, was Darin. His little tongue stuck out between his lips. The sight sent her heart into a flurry of happiness, even as she gently kissed his soft cheek. Their first day together as mother and son. Their first day together as a family. Her gaze shifted to her husband, his wavy blonde hair sliding across his brow. Gingerly, she brushed it out of his face, her heart swelling with love and pride. As the events of yesterday had slowly grown more painful and exhausting, he'd never wavered. And when Darin was finally born, when she saw all that love and devotion on his face when he held their son for the first time, she knew it was always meant to be this way. This man raising a family with her, choosing her after every bit of hardship they'd endured. Her boys. She loved them with every fiber of her being. The house was eerily silent after yesterday. She dimly realized they were still in her parents' room and wondered where they'd crashed for what remained of the night. Most likely the couch. Gazing around the room, she remembered a time when she'd been so young and small, when nightmares had kept her awake at night. She'd snuggled with her parents until she fell asleep. Until she felt safe and protected again. How ironic that the safest place for her to give birth to her own first child was in this same room. Posted on the walls in frames or on shelves were various pieces of art she'd drawn or small wooden toys Finn had built or fossils he'd found. Alongside the various weapons nailed to the walls and piles of notebooks filled with drawings of inventions, the room felt like home, rustic and messy and unapologetically haddock. A strong sense of nostalgia filled her chest. She wasn't so small anymore. She was a grown woman now with a husband and a baby. She gazed down at Darin in her arms, happy and thankful that nothing terrible had happened during the birth. Now if they could just get through the rest of the week. The stairs creaked and groaned as someone came up the stairs in soft, even steps. As if they were trying to not to make a sound. Curious, Adriana cleared her throat softly. The person paused at the edge of the stairs until moments later, Finn poked his head in, a spoon in his mouth. Phowie. Adriana snorted and sat up as carefully as she could without disturbing her sleeping boys. It's okay, I just wondered who it was. Finn stepped inside, his arms full of various items, a bag of bran, nuts and dried cherries, a bowl and a glass jug of milk. How he'd managed to carry all that up the stairs without dropping anything was a feat in and of itself. He sat down in the creaky wooden chair beside her, eyes crinkling in a wince at the noise. He set down the various items before finally pulling the spoon out of his mouth. Are you hungry? I can get another bowl. Actually, if you just open the bag, that would be perfect. Finn complied, watching with wide eyes as she plunged a hand deep into the bag of breakfast mix and pulled out a handful. What are you doing? You're contaminating the bag. Adriana shoved the mix into her mouth and shrugged. Why dirty more dishes for a dry breakfast? I've eaten it like this for years. Of course you have, Finn sighed, pouring himself a bowl and adding milk. He tucked his feet beneath him and dug in, giving her a stink eye when she went in for another handful. It's too crunchy that way. You need the milk to soften some of the crunchiness to make a perfect blend of soggy and crunchy. You're disgusting. I like good texture. Not too crunchy, not too soggy. If that's the case, Eric said groggily from her side. You should stop talking before it turns to mush. You just want me to stop talking. Finn said, but greedily shoveled another spoonful into his mouth. Inhaling deeply, Eric rolled onto his back and rubbed his face. That would be nice. Adriana tried to smooth the wrinkles out of his shirt, but it proved fruitless. How are you feeling? Tired, Eric admitted. He sat up and snatched the bag of breakfast mix away from Finn, who growled with protest. But it's not every day a servant brings me breakfast in bed, so it could be worse. I aim to please, Finn said, noisily slurping the milk from the bowl. I also aim to kill if I don't have at least one bowl, so. Eric ignored him and plunged his hand deep into the bag himself, much to Adriana's glee. Finn slurped the milk from his bowl again, but louder this time. Adriana wrinkled her nose. Would you stop? That's disgusting. Give me back my snackages and I will. Clearly you've enjoyed having Cliff as a roommate, Eric said, the sleep clearing from his eyes with each passing moment. He frowned at the pieces of bran, picking out the berries and the nuts and dropping the bran back into the bag. Finn almost spewed milk everywhere. He swallowed quickly, nearly choking, but finally demanded, what in Thor's name are you doing? You can't just pick out the good pieces. Why not? Why would I lose out on more of the good stuff? You said you wanted a second bowl. You can have more when I'm done. You Larsons are impossible. Eric smirked, but his teal eyes roved over Finn with a slight look of concern. How are you feeling? You look a bit worse for wear. Indeed he did. Adriana surveyed the bruise on the left side of her brother's face, the bandages covering his neck from his collarbone to almost as far up as his ear. And judging by the stiffness with which he moved, he had to be sore and bruised beneath his clothes too. Finn shrugged, pouring himself another bowl. My neck hurts. But I've handled worse. Still, you should take it easy today. Adriana said, reaching over to inspect the bandages. He scowled, but she ignored him, pulling back the wrapping just enough to survey the wound. She sucked in a breath at the angry red wound. Eric hissed. Annie, not when you're holding the baby. I'm just looking. He's got a point. Finn pulled out of her reach and patted the bandages back down. Blood and gore aren't conducive to the health and care of newborns. Since when do you know what's conducive to the health and care of newborns? Common sense helps. At that moment Darren stirred in her arms. His tiny face scrunched with displeasure at all the noise as a small whine sounded from his throat. I know, is that Daddy and Uncle Finn fighting over silly things? Adriana asked, bouncing him slightly in her arms. At least some people have had breakfast already and here we are, wasting away. Darren seemed inclined to agree because he began to cry more fervently. Finn winced. Our gods, don't encourage him. Finn, you may want to dismiss yourself, Adriana said, lifting Darren up so that he lay across her propped knees. I need to feed him and nobody wants to be here for that. What do you? Finn's eyes went wide. His face turned a blotchy shade of red. Oh. Right. Without another word, he stood and left the room. Wait, hang on. Eric sprang up from the bed and followed. Adriana didn't catch the full extent of their conversation, given that they were in the hall and she was a bit preoccupied with setting up Darren. She'd done all sorts of reading on breastfeeding in the previous months. The first few attempts had been a bit awkward and had no shortage of fumbling, but it wasn't so bad once they figured it out. See. We're a team, you and I, Adriana said to Darren once they got settled. She stroked the small patch of hair on his tiny head, which was so unfathomably soft, it didn't seem possible. We've got to work together on these things. Start early and we'll be unstoppable later, right? It felt so natural, talking to him. Of course she'd been talking to him ever since she'd first discovered she was pregnant, but having him here at last in her arms, it felt more permanent. Hey, no playing soldier yet, Eric said with a grin as he reappeared. He reclaimed his seat beside them and kissed her cheek, lingering a bit longer than usual. His teal eyes were clear and bright when he looked down at Darren. He's only a few hours old after all. Well, it's true all the same. We've got to be a unified front. I don't plan to have such a dramatic experience raising my kids. As if that was your parents' choice. Eric teased. Adriana planted a firm kiss on his cheek. Tush. A wave of fear crested in her chest. Though she tried to fight it, hide it, she knew he could see it. Brandine could still make the claim. And if he does? Eric caught her chin in his fingers, turning her face so their eyes met. It's going to be fine. I'll handle Brandine if it comes to that. Nothing has changed, we've just added another person to the mix. Another person who carries an awful lot of weight. Adriana pulled out of his gentle hold and turned, wincing at the slight pain in her body. Eric lifted an arm so she could snuggle into his chest more comfortably and he could see Darren better. She pushed Brandine and the claim and everything else out of her mind. It had been such a long 24 hours, she'd forgotten about the convocation and Brandine. But you're right. He kissed her temple and rubbed her arm. I won't let anything happen to you or Darren, Annie. And I won't let anything happen to you either, Adriana said. Like I said, we're a team, a unified front. We do this together. Eric nodded. They sat in silence for a while, watching Darren, relishing in the little life now in her arms. He was beautiful and amazing and quite possibly the cutest baby she'd ever seen. At the sound of movement and quiet talking downstairs, Eric said, "The meeting starts soon." Adriana looked up at him in surprise, trying to gauge his expression. "Are you going?" He sucked his teeth, clearly indecisive. "It's up to you. I'll do whatever you want me to, Annie. But Hiccup and Astrid are exhausted and Finn is still hurt. Ironically, I got more rest than the rest of you. They might need backup. Eric, you're not chief or the heir, nor are you on the council." Adriana reminded him. "Technically you're not allowed to intervene. I can as family to the chief if he and the heir are incapacitated. As next in line and with you out of commission, I could technically speak on behalf of the chief." Adriana sat up, twisting to look him full in the face. She didn't have words, but he must have read her shock and confusion well enough because he shrugged with a wry smile. "Interesting, the things you find in the law books while looking for loopholes. Clause 17 was one thing, Eric, but speaking on behalf of the village is another," Adriana said. "And if my parents and Finn agreed to it and you were to do that, you'd have to admit that I was out of commission. You'd be handing the information over to B." She froze, hating the name that almost slipped past her lips. "To the tribes on a silver platter." "I've thought of that already," Eric agreed. "It likely won't happen. Hiccup and Astrid are tired and Finn is hurt, but you're right, they'd never agree to it anyway. They'd sooner have Snotlout or one of the other councilmen speak on Hiccup's behalf." The slightly clipped, withdrawn way he said it made Adriana pause. She looked back up at him, trying to decipher the words he wouldn't say by his pinched brow and downturned lips. He wanted to help, He wanted to be involved. He wanted to do whatever it took to be a part of protecting his family and his village. And maybe, the idea of speaking in the meetings on behalf of his family, his chief. It would be an honor, I think, Adriana said at last. If, God forbid, something were to happen and someone needed to take their place, if that person was you. Eric rubbed a layer of the blankets between his fingers with a derisive snort. The only price would be my entire family. To become the steward of the title and throne of chief until Darin. He cut himself off, shaking his head. A terrifying thought, Adriana realized. He didn't want the job. It would be an honor to speak on the Haddock's behalf if they were still alive and merely out of commission. But if they were all deceased, including herself, then Eric would have the legal right to hold the position as steward of Burke until Darin was old enough to take the mantle. No wonder he was stressed. Not to mention if Brandine made the claim, which he still had 2 weeks to do. Gods, I wish you didn't read so much. Adriana hissed, slumping into his chest with what she hoped was a playfully annoyed huff. To her immense relief, Eric released a breathy laugh of his own. I know. Do you think my dad knows? He's the chief, I'd be shocked if he didn't. But that's a lot of hypotheticals, let's not think too hard about it. Agreed, Adriana said, adjusting Darin and her clothing as he started to whine. If you want to go to the meeting, Eric, go. I can't leave the house for a few days and it might be good to get out of the house. Get some fresh air and keep an eye on things. Bring back some juicy details from the meeting. Eric took a long deep breath. He exhaled and seemed to come to a decision. All right, I'll go. You'll have plenty of people here to help you, right? Definitely. All right. I'll come back when they dismiss us for lunch then. I'm going to take a quick bath before I leave though. Good idea, you smell. Eric snorted and kissed her cheek. But before he could leave, Darin opened his eyes, his tongue poking out once again. Adriana held him up with a coo. Good morning. Did you wake up after a good breakfast? Darin stared at her, his deep blue eyes seeming to swallow her whole. She wondered if they would stay blue or if they would change colors with time. Eric snickered before kissing Darin's forehead softly. You two be good. I'll be back in a few minutes. Oh, don't you worry, Mr. Larson, Adriana said, smirking when he tripped over the threshold and whipped around with wide eyes. We shall remain on our utmost best behavior. Shaking his head, Eric disappeared down the hall to retrieve his bag of things from her old closet, now Cliff's. Darin yawned widely. Adriana didn't think he could possibly be any cuter. Despite the love bursting in her chest, she felt a bit droopy herself and shuffled down into a reclining position. Darin snuggled into her chest. Within moments, he fell asleep with a tiny contented sigh, and Adriana smiled. She was going to love this new adventure. A crisp wind that smelled of salt blew in from the sea as Genevieve made her way through the village. She'd opted for more comfortable attire today and tied her hair back to keep it out of her face. With the Haddocks a bit scattered and likely exhausted, she wanted to be ready to help in any way she could, no matter what it entailed. Her parents had told her to stay out of it, of course, barring Finn. She didn't need to get involved with any of the tribes or the claim or anything. But it intrigued her. All of it. Especially Brandine. Oh, he disgusted her. Given his history with Adriana, long before he'd taken advantage of her, he'd been cunning and cruel, alienating her from her real friends, even going so far as to hurt Cliff. How anyone could willingly hurt such an effervescent, harmless boy. Still, she was curious. How did Brandine Anderson, the heir apparent to the Berserker tribe, hide his identity from all these people for so long? She'd seen the shift in personality during the meetings. She didn't think he was insane, he was a good actor. A very good actor. Finn wouldn't be happy if he could read her thoughts, if he knew just how intrigued she was. She couldn't even put her finger on why Brandine intrigued her so much. But she couldn't lie to herself, she wanted to pick his brain a little bit, figure out how he thought, his motivations. Why he'd gone to such lengths to hurt the Haddocks. Did he plan all of this from the very beginning? Little did she know, she would get her wish. She'd scanned the busy crowds after finishing a delicious cheese and strawberry pastry and a cup of freshly brewed cinnamon coffee from a Frisk vendor when she felt a shift in the air around her. As if everyone nearby tensed, a collective intake of breath. So she drinks coffee. Genevieve angled herself away from Brandine as he took a place at her side. He was back in his leather flight suit, tailored to fit his lithe, muscular body. She briefly wondered what sort of dragon he flew. His lips quirked to the side as if sensing her hesitation and ordered himself a coffee. The Frisk vendor poured it quickly and accepted the money without thanks before turning away to organize his wares. No other customers came to the cart. Not with Brandine here. Hiccup, it seemed, had done his job well. For better or worse, everyone knew who Brandine was now. Despite the flutter of her heart, Genevieve met his blue eyes head-on. "What do you want?" Brandine's smile was easy, engaging. "Just thought I'd come say hello." "Is that so horrible?" "I want nothing to do with you." "Right," Brandine said, sipping his coffee. His blue eyes sparkled with mischief, stark against the early morning sun. "You don't scare easily. There's a difference between fear and intimidation. I'd be an idiot not to fear you. But no, I'm not easily intimidated." Brandine laughed. "I see why Finn likes you. Smart, pretty, and as you said, not easily intimidated. He can be intimidating in his own right though, so if you can withstand his fire." "I was never intimidated or afraid of Finn," Genevieve said. "He's not like you outcasts. Or do you identify as a berserker now?" His lips quirked in amusement. The sunlight glinted in his dark hair, giving him a boyish look, a far cry from the predator who had tried to kill Finn the day before. "Careful, Genevieve," she thought. To him she said, "Well, you said hello. Is there anything else? I can't quite tell if you're always this prim and sassy or if that's just a front. Maybe it's just you. Maybe it is. I seem to have that effect on people. And why wouldn't it? You've plotted and schemed your way across the archipelago, wooing people to your cause. Only Hiccup outwitted you and you had to cheat to win the duel. So excuse me if I seem a little prim and sassy." Brandine nodded. "That's fair. I can accept that. But I couldn't very well get myself arrested without bond. I've got too much to do." Genevieve fought to keep the rising interest off her face. "And what, pray tell, might that be?" "Tell me a secret, princess, and I'll tell you one of mine." There was such a fine line between flirtation and confrontation. He used every bit of charm in his arsenal to make people feel at ease. Luckily she knew better. Still, she could feel it simmering just beneath the surface. The disgust he felt at being on this island. But he'd sell himself, sacrifice any bit of himself to get the information he wanted. And maybe see how far he could get with flirting with his enemy's girlfriend. Genevieve smiled sweetly. "My secrets are my own. And only one man gets the privilege to call me princess, and it's not you." Brandine smiled back, nonplussed. "Understood. I certainly wouldn't want to step on Finn's toes or make him feel like I was moving in on his girl." Imagine the rage. Genevieve blinked. She hadn't thought of that. "Oh yes, he has quite the temper. I've seen it. I'm not naive." "No, you're hardly naive," Brandine agreed. "Finn would never settle for just a pretty face. So clearly you're worth looking into if a mere month after knowing each other, he's wearing the Sullivan crest." A sense of lightheadedness overcame her. "How?" "Don't worry," Brandine said in a low voice. "Your secret is safe with me. But you shouldn't be surprised. I make it my mission to check up on all the players of the game, both new and veteran. This isn't a game." "How did you find out?" "Tell me a secret, Miss Sullivan, and I'll tell you." A cat with a mouse, that's what he was. She thought she'd been in control, and yet. "Hey Genevieve," a voice said, and a strong arm wrapped around hers. She looked up and nearly sagged with relief at Thorin. "How are you?" Despite his usual good-natured expression, his eyes were cold. Genevieve squeezed his arm. "I've had better Wednesdays." "Then I guess we'd better move along." Thorin steered her away. Brandine smirked as they left. "Until our next dance, Genevieve." She threw a scowl over her shoulder and allowed Thorin to lead her away. Rosamund, Morgan and Evan were waiting in a cluster nearby, the pair looking on with equally cold expressions. They closed ranks around her and quickened their pace until Brandine was lost in the crowds. When they were some distance away, Thorin released her arm. "Are you all right?" "Fine," Genevieve said. "I understand now how he got under everyone's skin so easily. He's slippery." "You have no idea," Morgan said. "Why were you talking to him?" "It wasn't by choice. If I just turned and walked away, I think he would have followed." "What did he want?" Genevieve reviewed the conversation, squinting at the crowds. "I think he wanted information. Probably about Anna and the baby. Nobody has seen her since the duel." Morgan squinted. "Did she?" "I don't know. I haven't seen Finn or any of them yet." "The meeting is starting soon," Evan said. "At least the chief has to show up at some point." Genevieve met each of their eyes. "You guys can't tell Finn I talked to him. Brandine was right about one thing, he'd go ballistic." "He'd have every right to go ballistic," Thorin said. "Look, Jen, you weren't here to see everything go down. Nobody knew what happened with Adriana and Brandine, but all of a sudden he and Eric were fighting in the Great Hall, then he just up and left. Next thing we know, Adriana took off. They didn't tell us what happened until later, what happened to her and why Brandine left. It was a really stressful time." Morgan added. "And that betrayal, everything he did," Evan said. "That went deep. All that rage Finn is feeling, it's still locked up, and issuing Clause 17 was his best shot at taking Brandine out." "I know all of this," Genevieve said, a touch impatiently. "I was there for the meetings and the duel. I know the stakes." "Then do us all a favor," Thorin said. "And the next time Brandine approaches you, walk away. Find someone you know and don't leave their side. Do whatever it takes to ignore him. Because if he so much as lays a finger on you, nobody will be able to hold Finn back from tearing him to shreds. Not the chief, not the law, nothing." Genevieve swallowed hard. They were right, of course. "So you won't tell him?" Thorin blinked. "No, I mean if he asks or Brandine opens his big mouth. By all means don't lie to him, but if we can avoid it, at least until we get through the rest of the week." Genevieve said. She understood the stress now. She understood how a girl who didn't know any better could let Brandine right in with his charm and easy smiles and not realize that she'd just let a fox into the henhouse. "Thank you, by the way," Genevieve said to Thorin. "He was starting to get to me." "What do you mean?" Genevieve chewed her lip. She couldn't tell them about the swapping of necklaces, though she wondered if they would understand the meaning behind it. "He knows things about me and Finn that most others don't. Things about our relationship. That only confirms that he has a network of spies." Evan muttered, crossing his arms across his chest. "The Haddocks have suspected that for months." Genevieve exhaled. What had she gotten herself into? She didn't regret it, choosing Finn, his family. But she was finally realizing that she was just another player in an unfinished game that had started 10 years ago, when Hiccup and Dager had gone head-to-head in a duel that had cost the latter his life. She only hoped the game wouldn't end in as much bloodshed as when it started. Genevieve was quiet throughout breakfast. Finn was so tired and frankly in so much pain that it initially didn't bother him so much. He'd assumed she was lost in thought or concern over him or Adriana. Except she wasn't looking at him or asking questions. Her shoulders were tight as she gripped the steaming mug of cider in her hands with clenched fingers. Finn reached across the table and touched her wrist. Her downcast eyes shot up in surprise, almost as if she'd forgotten he was there. "Are you okay?" She shook herself and pulled a believable smile onto her face. "Yes, I'm fine. How's Anna?" He squinted. Genevieve was good at hiding her emotions beneath that happy, smiling mask. It was how she'd hid her longing for adventure from her family for so long and was able to comply with their wishes. "She's fine," Finn said finally. "Tell me what's wrong." "Nothing is wrong," Genevieve said, avoiding his eyes and looking away. She lifted her cider to her lips and took a long drink. When she set the mug down again, she added, "I was up late worrying about Anna, that's all. Not a lie." She likely had been. But she was obviously hiding something. Jen. Finn. The chair beside him squealed against the floor before a lanky mass threw his arms around Finn's shoulders and squeezed. Bruh, you're alive. Cliff's bushy hair tickled his face even as the sudden onslaught of movement sent a sharp pain through his neck. Ow, Cliff. Yes, I'm alive. He patted his friend's arm awkwardly until he pulled away. Cliff, be careful, Taryn said, taking a seat next to Genevieve. You'll hurt him. I wish everyone would relax. I'm fine. Are you sure about that? Taryn asked. You're rather pale. I'm not dead yet. Finn said. So he lowered his voice and leaned forward. Their heads came together and he murmured, I have some good news. Finn met Genevieve's eyes and she gave him a subtle nod. There weren't many people close enough to hear over the din of noise echoing through the great hall. He whispered, Anna had the baby this morning. It's a boy. Oh my gods. Cliff erupted, crawling atop the table and opening his mouth to shout his jubilation. Leashing the pain, Finn grabbed him by the shirt and dragged him back into his seat. Shut up. He hissed, glancing around again. Nobody knows yet, you idiot. Cliff covered his mouth, then shook out of Finn's grip. He leaped atop his chair and brandished a finger for all to see. Everyone, I have an announcement. Finn's heart thundered as the great hall quieted. Cliff, no. Cliff floundered momentarily, as if searching for the next words to say. Seem to have lost my pet, Flopsy. Has anyone seen him? Taryn put her face in her hands. Genevieve blinked up at him with a look of confusion, as if trying to determine if he was serious or not. Finn just pursed his lips. Well, that was one way to cover his first outburst. Most people throughout the great hall scoffed and returned to their breakfast. Anyone? Cliff asked, turning in his spot atop his chair. He likes to eat cabbages and has a strange infatuation with shiny things. You there, my good man? Cliff leaped off his chair and chased after a man from Brawn, who quickened his pace as the mad curly-haired boy sprinted after him. Oh gods, Finn sighed. Hey, at least he makes up for his near mistakes with enthusiasm. Genevieve said. Oh, that's so exciting though. Taryn whispered. Is he cute? What's his name? Cute, yes, but I'm not saying his name yet. Not here. Understandable. Taryn said. I suppose that explains why your parents look so tired. Finn followed her line of sight where his parents were both drinking from large mugs. From the way his mom shuddered with each swallow like she was being force-fed Yarnog, he assumed it was coffee. Yeah, they were up all night. How are they still standing? Genevieve asked in a hushed voice. Honestly, I have no idea. They got maybe 3 hours of sleep. Finn's gaze swept over a large group of people who entered the hall. He blinked when he saw Eric, who caught sight of their table and made a beeline toward them, an unmistakable sign of happiness etched all over his face. Apparently he didn't care who saw when Taryn hopped up from her seat and hugged him. She kissed his cheek when she pulled back, beaming. Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. Thanks, Taryn. Eric said, aiming for the seat beside Finn. But he froze when Cliff sprinted out of the crowd, his mysteriously missing pet Flopsy forgotten, and threw out his arms for a hug. Cliff embraced him tightly, laughing and fluffing his hair. Eric pulled away with a mock scowl and rearranged the waves so they didn't stick up in so many strange angles. See? Genevieve said, drawing his attention. Curly hair. It goes everywhere when you mess with it. Bruh, what's he look like? Cliff asked as they sat. What color hair does he have? What color eyes? He doesn't have a lot of hair yet, Eric said in as quiet a voice as he could muster. Finn hadn't seen him so ecstatic since the wedding. And his eyes are blue now, which could change. Ah, I can't wait to meet him. Cliff gushed. Can I hold him? Am I allowed? Absolutely. Eric said, as if the idea of not allowing his best friend to hold his son was impossible. If we got Finn to hold him. Genevieve and Taryn gasped, staring at him with a look of awe. You got Finn to hold him? Yes, don't act so surprised. Finn said. Turns out I'm quite good at it. Genevieve had a strange smile on her face that he couldn't quite place, but it made its stomach flip all the same. Like the thought of him holding a baby was something she found attractive. If that was the case, he'd need to borrow Darren as soon as possible and test out that theory. Eric seemed to read the thoughts and scoffed. Don't get any ideas, mister. Before Finn could reply, a hand clapped his shoulder and squeezed. Glad to see you're out and about. Finn looked up in surprise to see Chief Jade the Just. All amusement from their conversation melted from his face and he made to stand, but Jade squeezed his shoulder again. No, please, he smiled, green eyes glittering. No need for formalities in such a relaxed setting. I just thought I'd come by and see how you're doing. Fine, Finn said, turning to face the chief of the cutthroats. Hanging in there. I was amazed at your skills yesterday. I admit I was a bit unnerved when you invoked Clause 17, but you proved that you're an able fighter, Jade said. Not to mention you held your own in the meetings. Finn felt both a rush of pride and embarrassment. Well, thanks. And as for you, Jade said, turning to Eric, whose brows lifted in surprise. Keep that bow close. You've got a good eye. We'll need that in the days to come. Eric's jaw tightened and nodded. Mostly I came to tell you both that you proved yourselves immensely yesterday. Jade continued. Given everything that's happened, you've proven to myself and my colleagues, indeed many of the chieftains, that you won't sit by and let injustice stand. We look for these things in a leader. Some people are born into it, he nodded at Finn, and then looked at Eric. Others learn it. Both of you will always have supporters on Cutthroat. If you ever need anything at all, just ask. Finn felt a rush of amazement and gratitude. Thank you. That means more to us than you know. Trying times are coming. You can smell it in the air. Jade said, glancing around the gathered crowds within the hall. We'll need all the allies, true allies we can get. Why even bother with all of this pomp and circumstance, Finn asked. If we don't trust half the people we're allying ourselves with. Because divided, we fight amongst ourselves more. At least with the semblance of a treaty binding us, we have that as a buffer between our peoples. Notice how much the fighting has stopped since your father convinced the allied tribes to accept Outcast Island into our midst. Sure, they are still bloodthirsty devils, but we've had less battles and death on all corners of the archipelago since. They've been itching for more battle since Dagur died, Finn said. Ali had a point yesterday. We can't expect them to change their ways. Indeed. But it's not about changing people or what the outcasts bring to the table for the rest of the tribes. Sometimes having them do nothing is all the rest of us need. Keeping a short leash on their armies because we will hold them accountable. If they strike any one tribe, Eric said, the others will rise up on a unified front to retaliate. He frowned. How exactly did all of you convince Ali to sign that treaty? Jade scowled. We didn't. Dagur did. Finn frowned. What could Dagur have wanted by the treaty? What profit could they have gained by joining? It didn't make sense. Though he couldn't do anything about it, Finn said slowly. My dad thought I made a mistake with invoking Clause 17. He wanted another chief's opinion. He'd mulled it over all night, wondering if he'd actually made the right decision. Now that he was actually on speaking terms with Jade, he was curious what the man thought. Jade sighed through his nose. I think you had a very hard call to make. Let your father steer the ship or take the wheel yourself. Both routes would have had choppy seas. Pros and cons. But what's done is done. There's no changing it. I don't think you made a wrong decision. And for what it's worth, I don't think Stoic would have done it any other way. You mean he wouldn't have played the peace card like my dad wanted? Your father, Jade chuckled, has always done things differently. You're very much like your grandfather. You might find it strange, but I saw a lot of him in you yesterday. Finn smirked, even as Eric and Taryn laughed. Genevieve smiled, though she'd never met his Poppy. The thought made him sad. Stoic would have loved her. But Jade added, the same stubbornness runs through your father. It didn't skip a generation. Neither did the bravery or the strong sense of right or wrong. Your father might not be inclined to shoot first, ask questions later, but that's because he does not wish to hurt people if he can help it. Finn nodded. Our families have been good friends for decades, and your father has gotten me out of many pickles in our day as chieftains. And seeing the great lengths you would go to protect your family and defend your sister's honor. It reminded me of Stoic. How he did not flinch in the face of adversity and fighting for what he believed. Finn stared, a bit dumbfounded. Thank you. That means a lot. But since I lost the duel, a lot of people think that I set us up for failure. On the contrary, Jade said. You may have lost the duel, fearless Finn, but the war has yet to begin. You have earned the respect of many. That will carry far more weight in the days to come. His heart leapt in fear at that, but it also burned with pride. Even if the worst should happen, he had supporters behind him. Jade, Kara and Sven, Millie, Kamikaze, Ivan, he wasn't alone in this. For the first time, he realized the strength he had on his side, amassed by the fellow chieftains that one day he'd work with. My dad is afraid of war, he said quietly. Hiccup has been fighting his entire life, Jade agreed. Since he was 15, and it has hardly stopped, with only a few small years of peace scattered between. That sort of life can grate on a person. To some it makes them angry or spiteful. Others, they can become paranoid. Do not judge him too harshly. Finn nodded. Thanks, Jade. I appreciate it. Jade nodded and turned his green eyes toward the gathered tribes. The meeting begins soon. I must return to my people. The chieftain bowed slightly to Genevieve and Tarin. Ladies. Finn stared after him as he left and joined his large group of people in the corner. Eric clapped him on the back, pulling him from his thoughts. Who knew that risking your life in the ring would garner supporters of your own? He felt inclined to agree. He hadn't expected that to happen. And even though his body was hurt and healing, he realized he'd need to make talking with the chieftains more of a priority. He should talk to each and every one of them. Especially those who were young like him. They were figuring out the trade just as he was, yet they already had the position, the weight of responsibility on their shoulders. If Brandine and Ali and Gray were scheming, they would need all the support they could get. And he couldn't risk losing any allies to them. He liked to think that the young chieftains would never side with Brandine, but he didn't actually know them. His parents had kept him and Adriana so distant from the other tribes growing up that he'd never really gotten to know the other kids. And now they were all adults, with agendas and responsibilities and cares of their own. Hey, Genevieve said, taking his hand. Are you okay? Finn blinked and faced his friends. Yeah, just thinking. She gave him a slow, understanding smile and squeezed his hand. The gong sounded. The chatter in the hall rose in volume as people gathered up their plates and stampeded to the nearest trash bucket. The chieftains took up their assigned seats around the table alongside their councils and family members. Finn sighed and stood, wincing. He was really tired of being injured. All right, I guess I'll see you all later. Cliff and Tarin didn't look too pleased to leave and joined the throng exiting the hall. But Eric stayed. At his questioning look, Eric shrugged. Someone has to bring home the juicy details to Annie. Finn snorted and kissed Genevieve's temple. I'll see you later. Though she smiled up at him, he could still see that worry or whatever it was clouding her eyes. But he didn't have time to ask again what was wrong, so he resolved to do it later. She squeezed his hand and left without so much as a goodbye. Is it just me, Eric said. Or is she being really quiet? It's not just you. Finn said, watching as she located her seat across the room. Keep an eye out for me. Let me know if you see anything weird. You've got it. Where are you going to sit? Mara's not here, so I'm taking her seat instead. Finn nodded. See you later then, I guess. They parted ways. Finn glanced at his parents, both of whom had steaming mugs in front of them. Hiccup spared him a quick glance as he organized a pile of papers in front of him but didn't speak. Probably conserving all his energy for the upcoming meeting. A few white strings for tea bags hung over the lip of his mother's mug. He snorted. Apparently she'd had enough coffee for one day. The great hall door slammed to a close and Finn settled in his chair with a long exhale. Time for round 2. Hiccup had a splitting headache. While he didn't regret staying up all night to see his new grandson, he couldn't help but bemoan the horrible timing of both events. The convocation and his grandson's birth. It probably would have made little difference if Darren had been born last week. They'd still be stressed out of their minds, waiting to see if Brandine would issue the challenge. As the hall gradually went silent around him, signaling the start of the next meeting, a familiar step thunk sounded behind him. Judging by the sound, the person was lightweight, and Gobber had already taken his seat, so that meant Eric was here. Hiccup waited another moment, scribbling down a final note until he knew Eric had claimed a seat in the row behind him. The silence probably seemed a bit too long for comfort, but he didn't care. He was in no mood to cater to every person's feelings at the moment. He took a deep breath into his lungs, pushing aside his mild annoyances born out of sleep deprivation and said, "All right, day 2. Today we're discussing the future of the allied clans. Does anyone have any suggestions?" Usually he'd say more, but he didn't feel like scrounging up more dialogue to decorate what he wanted to say. Judging by the few glances around the table, the other chieftains seemed to notice his dry approach by comparison. Finn seemed to appreciate it at least. Kamikaze cleared her throat. 2 words, duck farms. She launched into an unceremonious diatribe about duck farms being erected on each island for the benefit of the allied tribes. She stated that she'd been up all night coming up with ideas. Hiccup held his tongue, allowing her to speak and waste some time just to get conversation going, though he was tempted to say that she wasn't the only one lying wide awake all night. Maybe they weren't the only two. Numerous eyes had a glazed look to them. He bit back a snort. And as vice president of the Duck Committee, Kamikaze stated, turning in her chair. "What do you think of my proposal, Finn?" Finn blinked. "I wasn't aware I'd won the election." Hiccup rolled his eyes, even as others laughed, particularly the younger chiefs and heirs. It was a unanimous vote, Kamikaze notes. "Mainly myself. There was no contest." "Well, as vice president, I think it's a great idea," Finn said in a false cheery tone. "And while we're at it, we can add pony rides and popcorn stands." Multiple groans sounded around the table. Hiccup allowed himself to laugh and share an amused look with Astrid. "But that's an excellent idea," Kamikaze cried. "We could raise money doing this." "Oh." Hiccup. "Yes, Cam. We could even sell tickets for people to take rides on Toothless, since he's the only Night Fury in existence." Toothless' head popped up from where he lay nearby, ears alert at the sound of his name. "See? He even likes the idea." Hiccup scowled. "He's not the only Night Fury in existence that we know of, and we are not making money off him. But there's my point, he's the only Night Fury we have. People would come from miles around." Cam Hiccup huffed and rubbed his eyes. "And how do you propose all these people who come from miles around to ride him will be able to do so, seeing as only I have the ability to work his tail?" Finn. Toothless rumbled in agreement and slumped back into a curled position. "We can raise ticket prices so you can train them." "No, I'm not training anyone to ride my dragon." "But." "No." Kamikaze slumped in her seat, every bit the picture of an impetuous child who was denied a sucker. "Killjoy. Sorry if I've got enough things on my plate to worry about." Hiccup ignored the way Brandine's gaze sharpened. "Does anyone have any worthwhile ideas that would significantly benefit the allied tribes?" Ali cleared her throat and sat forward, withdrawing a document from a pocket of her black leather jacket. "I have an idea. Plans, in fact. Based on the steadily declining population of Outcast Island, due to many hard-working folk abandoning us for other tribes," she spared him a brief glare. "And combined with the fact that the majority of my people are skilled blacksmiths or warriors, we're not bringing in as much crop as we should. I admit it, we could do better." A blink was all the surprise Hiccup would show. Sven sat forward. "So what are you proposing?" "Any of the allied tribes would be more than willing to assist." "To a degree," Ali interrupted. "As much as I love my dear friends gathered at this table, I prefer not to indebt myself to my neighbors. No, I have a better idea." She set the paper down in front of her and patted it almost lovingly. "I've been on speaking terms with some merchants alongside my good friend Gray, and we've come to an agreement. They've already started bringing in the extra hands to till the land. We expect our harvest to be 2 times as plentiful, if we're lucky 3 times as better as we're used to. Extra hands. Jade interrupted. What do you mean? Hiccup felt a strong sense of foreboding. Slaves. Finn's head snapped up. Ali shrugged. I prefer to think of them as indentured servants, but to each his own. Semantics, Hiccup said, lacing his fingers to hide their shaking. You're going to force other people to do your farming and building. Amongst other things, yes. Ali said. Honestly, I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner. Outcast Island has been in the doldrums for far too long. We need steady workers to till the land if it's ever going to thrive. And what better hands to work it than those who've been tilling their entire lives? Finn's jaw went slack in horror, his hands curling into fists. Ali, let us help. Kara said, leaning across her brother so their eyes could meet. We're allies, we can help each other, but please, don't do this. It's already done. Gray said, his silver eyes lighting with amusement. As if he knew just how enraged Hiccup was that they'd done this, made this deal without speaking to the other allied tribes first. We cannot go back on our word or risk annihilation. You do realize, Hiccup said, voice trembling slightly with rage, that slave traders will stop at nothing to get what they want. Give them an inch and they will take a mile. Of course they'll stop at nothing, it's business. Business? Finn demanded. Those are people you're talking about. People who will make us a lot of money, Ali said with a smirk. What's done is done. We can't back out now or risk our entire tribe becoming slaves ourselves. After all, they will take a cut of our monthly profits, just as they do with Rune. I paid through the nose for this deal and it will reward my tribe handsomely, far more than any assistance your villages could offer me combined. Sure, to the detriment of everyone else, Lucky Louie shouted. You just flung open the doors to the entire archipelago. Aren't you glad I warned you? Ali asked sweetly. When they come knocking on your doors with questions about expansion. Well, compliance would be your best option. We wouldn't want the allied tribes to fall into disarray because you said no. Hiccup felt sick. What did you tell them? The thing about business transactions, Ali said, smirking when Finn bristled. It goes both ways. We didn't want to show our hand too early, just tease them enough with other prosperous, more fertile lands. Multiple cries of outrage rang up around the table, even as Ivan shook his head in disbelief. He looked at his wife, as if wondering for the first time if perhaps they should have stayed out of this alliance after all. Not that it would matter, Hiccup thought with no small amount of disgust. They had already been targeted. Together they were stronger, his allies had to see that. Yui of the Woeful Whalers cleared his throat. So you mean to tell us that they know there are various other tribes here, ripe for the taking? Because you told them. Of a sort, Gray said, nodding at the parchment before Ali. Actually, they said if we could get the remaining allied leaders to sign, we'd each get a significant discount on the slaves we acquire. Finn and multiple chieftains shot to their feet in outrage. Hiccup grabbed his son by the arm as arguments rose up around the great hall, echoing and rising in volume with rage and tinged with something sharp. Panic. It was panic in their voices as they shouted at Ali and Gray, Brandine sitting beside them with an amused smile. Soaking in the rising chaos. Their eyes met across the table. Brandine inclined his head in a slow, mocking gesture. Sit down. Hiccup shouted to Finn, who still struggled against his arms. Snotlout's arms wrapped around Finn's chest from behind. I've got him. Hiccup stood, the raging arguments echoing in his ears. At his side, Astrid engaged in a loud shouting match with Kara and Ali, her blue eyes stark against the redness of her skin. Ali looked thrilled to have caused such a riot. Only a handful of people had remained in their seats. Sorka Sandalwood and Tolam II, both of whom watched the rising chaos with wide, inexperienced eyes. Sven sat with his laced hands against his mouth, brow pinched. Even with all the noise, that strategist's mind was still going. And Eric, sitting a row behind him. His teal eyes were hard, his mouth drawn in a firm line. Sensing his gaze, Eric looked up, and Hiccup could almost see the thoughts written on his face. As if they didn't have enough to worry about, now they had to worry about slave traders invading the archipelago. No. This was just conjecture. Ali and Gray, they wanted everyone to panic. This needed to stop. Hiccup turned away from the gathered tribes. Toothless. Even over the din, his best friend still somehow heard him. The Night Fury leapt onto the nearest column, claws scrabbling against the wood. With all the noise nobody heard him coming until he slammed atop the center table and roared so loudly, the chandeliers shook. Shaken, the gathered leaders and their people jumped back, arguments forgotten. The noise died away and Hiccup climbed atop